This is Audible.
Harlequin Audio is proud to bring you Trinity, a De La Vega Cats novel by Dane. Performed by Tanya Eby. Chapter 1. Renee wiped the counter down, smiling as she swayed her ass to ABBA as they told the story of Fernando. The warmth pressing against the windows and outer walls of the building brought a languid fluidity to her muscles. She envied Sam. The fat feline sprawled in his high perch, furry belly flopped to the side. It would have been an excellent day to simply lie in the sun and nap the hours away. Wisps of light from the high casement windows played through the air, swirling down over her little juice and coffee bar, catching the crystals and other such stuff her stepmother had hung up all over the place. Dust motes danced to the hum of energy in the shop. More despite Susan than because of her. The shop was a metaphysical bookstore and magic shop, owned by a woman who did not believe in magic. The irony of that wasn't lost on Renee, but since she did believe in magic, the shop seemed to be fine with the current state of affairs. Each day she entered the shop she felt embraced by it, which made those not-so-welcome feelings from her stepmother slightly easier to bear. Renee had chosen the space in a sunny archway inside the Willow Broom when she'd signed the lease. At first, she'd decided to set up shop there because it would keep her in her father's life somehow. She'd at least have a regular opportunity to see him. Their relationship hadn't been strained, but it wasn't close either, and she craved that. But from the moment she walked in, the space had called to her. That alcove fed her energy each day. It kept her warm in the winter and cool in the summer. The light through the stained glass created colorful dances across the walls and over the floors and shelves. The shop was located on a busy street near the T-stop, so there'd be a steady stream of customers all day. No one bothered her about what to serve and when. She kept her own hours, loved the space and her customers. Best of all, the bar enabled her to pay her half of the mortgage, and it kept her in shoes, so what did she have to frown over? She didn't even need to glance toward a clock to know it was time to leave for the day. Time to head home to Galen. She smiled as she pictured him changing out of his suit and into jeans and a threadbare t-shirt. All that gorgeous, lean, hard muscle lying flat against his body. He moved like the predator he was, quiet and purposeful, big brown, black eyes, never failing to take in everything around him, but wrapped in a most charming and stylish package. Sexy and totally focused on her. To be cherished and adored by a man like Galen was one of life's greatest gifts. She had no idea how she'd lucked out, but she planned to keep him forever. "I'm out of here," she called out after she'd put away her cleaning supplies. The pale green scarf Galen had given Renee for her birthday was soft and cool against her neck as she wrapped it a few times before pulling her cardigan on. The air outside wasn't cold yet, but it had a bite, and the sun would be going down soon. She neared the front door and slowed, pausing to look around slowly. It wasn't time to leave yet. Just wait. The decks of tarot cards on the nearby display beckoned, and she fondled them. So pretty and colorful. The shop smelled of rosemary and sage, of amber and magic. Briefly, she wished Susan could see just how special the shop was, but at that point, Renee knew it was a lost cause. Oh well, she could enjoy it just as easily. Her phone rang and she smiled, relaxing as she picked up. "Hello there, handsome. I'm getting ready to leave now." The sound of his voice was like caramel, thick and sweet. "Evening to you, babe. Just calling to check in. I brought some dinner home from the deli." "Yum. I'm good. Just leaving now. I'll be home in about 10 minutes. I love you." "See you in 10. I love you too." She was still smiling as she got outside while she fumbled to tuck her phone back into her bag. She hadn't even noticed where she'd been going until she ran straight into someone a few steps up the street. "I'm sorry." She bent to help him pick up the things he'd dropped, oranges, apples, and fresh bread. "These look good. Mrs. Unger has the nicest produce." She finally looked up as they both stood, and everything just sort of stopped as pale blue eyes met hers and saw straight to her bones. Her knees went a little weak at the energy between them. Wow. So not her usual type. It was as if a Southern California surfer boy simply appeared before her eyes. Olive-toned skin, golden blonde hair, just a tad too long, an open assessing gaze, and from what she could tell with the clothes he had on, an athlete's build, too. A breeze brought it, the scent of forest and loam. She breathed deep, turning the notes of the music the smells made over on her tongue, in her brain. Sometimes Renee experienced things differently than most people, and right then, this blonde man had flipped every switch in her brain and body. Just looking at him and smelling his skin threatened overload, and still she could not get enough. The sharpness of it, the total unexpected edge of desire she felt in her gut alarmed her, even as she tasted the rich and heady flavor and craved more. But at the back of her mind, she knew this was not okay. She pulled herself back from that edge and shook her head a bit. He reached out and touched her arm, just quickly. And yet she felt the echo of it even after he'd moved his hand away.
"Are you all right?"
What a voice. Lazy, redolent with sex. Deep. Hopefully he didn't hear the slight breathy quality of her reply. "I'm fine. Your apples might be bruised." A puzzled look skirted over his features briefly until he smiled. Big white teeth, pale blue eyes, that hair. Renee took a step back to try and break the connection forming between them, but he took a step forward.
"I'm Jack Myers."
He held out his hand and she took it. Instead of shaking it, he turned her wrist, bending to press a kiss just there, his lips against her pulse. He straightened slowly and she practically yanked her hand from his grasp, even as his gaze held her still. Those golden threads of connection she'd felt just moments before were back. "I really need to get home. I'm glad you're okay." Her smile was too bright, she knew, too false and cheery, but he did something to her insides. Her insides belonged to someone else. "Thank you very much."
"Wait."
He took her hand again, and she didn't want him to let go, which startled her into doing just that. This was not okay. "I need to go. It was nice to meet you."
"Have dinner with me."
She tugged and he let her hand go, but she saw his features, knew he didn't want to.
"Candlelight wine and a few slow dances."
Something inside her liked that, responded to the idea, and that scared her. She loved Galen. He was her man, and she wasn't supposed to get all tingly and breathless about anyone else. She was being stupid, and it was time to simply walk away right then. "Thanks for asking, Jack. I'm flattered, really. But I can't. I'm with someone, really with someone. I don't have dinner with anyone but him." That was the truth, or as simple as she could make it anyway. She took one step and then another, letting the threads of connection between them pull and snap, feeling her connection to Galen right where it should be. "Night." She raised a hand to wave and turned away from him, toward home where she belonged. Once she'd done that, everything felt better and she relaxed.
"Hey,"
he called out, and she kept walking, but turned her head.
"You never said what your name was."
"I guess I didn't. Night, Jack." She grinned and turned away again. Jack stood rooted to the spot on the sidewalk as she walked away, as his mate walked away. The strain on his muscles burned as he held himself back, held his wolf from grabbing her and heading for the hills. One moment he'd been caught by the glimmers of gold and burgundy in her short curly hair, and the next, as he kissed her wrist, he'd been breathing her in, filling himself with her scent, until he nearly shook at the recognition of who she was. She was in him, rushing through his veins, becoming part of him. Just beneath her scent lay the scent of a cat. A cat and sex. And as she'd been there, reacting to him, her body had warmed and the spice of her want of him had taken over everything within him. His skin tingled with awareness and need, the need to claim her and mark her as his, until not even the memory of that cat remained in her mind. Tension washed away with the knowledge that he'd found her. The ever-familiar ache, wanting the one woman he couldn't ever have, he realized, was gone. He let his breath out slow. For the first time since he'd become Grace Warden's anchor bond, she wasn't the woman dominating his thoughts. He rolled back, balancing on the balls of his heels as he inhaled her scent on the breeze. His wolf wanted to howl with delight. Something else. More than a cat in her bed. His mate was something more than human. She smelled of magic, of amber and lavender sugar. He smiled at the memory of the sugar his foster mother made for tea in the winter. It boded well, this memory. This woman was meant to be on that sidewalk when he'd walked by. Of course it couldn't be easy, no. He'd watched his friends find their mates, and not a one of them had just bumped into another wolf at a dinner party and mated. End of story. Happily ever after achieved. She'd said she was with someone, and he scented a cat. From what he understood of cat shifters, they didn't idly live with others, especially in a romantic sense. They shared their space with their imprinted mates, their spouses, under their law. Still, he didn't need to jump to conclusions. If she was mated to another, she couldn't have rung his own mate bell. The mate bond wasn't so cruel to a wolf that he'd find his other half and have her totally unattainable. This called for some thought. She needed to be courted, showered with attention. He was old enough to realize most modern, non-shifter women would not appreciate the wooing of the wolf sort straight from go. No scooping up and claiming against a wall with feverish urgency on the first date for her. He'd loved women long enough to have perfected the art of seduction, and this would be the most important seduction of his life. Smiling as he watched the last of her turn a corner a few blocks away, he turned and headed into the shop she'd just exited. A magic shop of sorts. But her stamp wasn't the one on the place overall. Not that he could tell. There was some overkill, especially toward the registers. His little witch didn't seem to be the overkill type. Still, her magic hung about, intertwined with the magic of the place. It liked her. "Excuse me." He sent his most boyishly charming smile at a woman nearby. She looked to him, assessing his wallet most likely. The woman had crafty eyes. He'd studied people long enough to know which people to avoid. This one was bound to come with trouble. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for a woman who works here. Her name escapes me just now. Small, probably about 5 feet or so. Dark curly hair, big eyes." "Renee?" He nodded, relieved. Her name was Renee. Mentally, he rolled the sounds around, liking them immensely. What he didn't like was this woman he was speaking to. She of the shifty eyes and thin, sharp scent of lies. His mate was in contact with this woman every day? He shuddered inwardly, but kept his smile in place. "She went home for the day. She closes the coffee and juice bar down at 3:30 every weekday. If you're looking for a coffee, there's a diner across the street." "Thanks, I'll drop in to see her another time." The woman he'd been speaking to crossed her arms over her chest. "You a friend of hers?" "Yes. Have a nice night." He turned and waved as he headed out the door. He had his work cut out. Of course he never doubted he'd be successful. She was his mate. Their connection and attraction would be very strong. Strong enough that once she got to know him and trust him, she'd drop this cat and come to him. If she hadn't been his, he'd have felt guilty about trying to break up a relationship. But she was, and he was meant to have her. He looked forward to spending every moment of the rest of his life making sure she was never sorry. Starting the next day, he'd make himself a regular part of her life. He'd be there and get to know her. Let her know him. It would be a challenge, but one he relished. Satisfied, he headed toward his condo, opposite where she'd gone, and relished the next part of his life. The last years had been pretty quiet, peaceful, and he'd been dying inside each day as he watched Grace and Cade together, totally in love and united, their children underfoot and just as lovable as their parents. He'd known being an anchor meant that male would feel bonded to the female much like her mate did. But no one told him what it would be like to love Grace and know he could never have her. On top of knowing how much Grace adored her husband, Cade and Jack had become close friends. They were his family, and his love of them was double-edged in a way Jack knew Cade understood very well until the moment he'd met Grace. Cade had loved his sister-in-law for a very long time as well. He changed course, heading toward the building just a few doors down from his, where Cade and his family lived. He wanted to share this with them. Chapter 2. "Jack!" Grace looked up from where she sat at the kitchen table, trying to guide a spoon into baby Henry's mouth. The boy ate like he was not quite convinced he'd come into contact with food again, guppy lips seeking the spoon and sending the food half into his mouth, and the rest all over his face and Grace's arm. Henry said Jack's name a few times until Jack leaned down and brushed a kiss on the top of his head.
Hey there, kid.
He stepped back, moving to the fridge to get a soda.
Hey, short stuff. What's happening?
He asked Grace. She smiled up at him, looking just as lovely as she always did, and while he appreciated it, loved it because it was part of her, he wasn't affected by it the way he was when he thought of those wine-hued curls. Something exciting must have happened. It's all over your face.
Weren't you just here 2 hours ago?
Kate wandered into the kitchen, Annabelle on his hip, her fingers wrapped in the front of her dad's shirt to keep her balance.
I left. Flirted with the ladies at my local produce stand, only to have a woman rush out a door and knock my apples to the pavement.
He paused when Becca bounced into the room. Becca, Kate and Grace's oldest child, was the spitting image of her mother, and while her mom and dad were first in her heart, Jack followed a close second. Jack had long since decided that was a good place to be. "You're here!" Becca launched herself toward him and he caught her, hugging her tight.
I am, dollface. Give me some sugar while I try to look hungry enough to get invited to dinner.
Jack kissed her upturned face, reaching out to tweak Annabelle's toes when she swung her fat little foot into his reach. He wanted this. He wanted a family of his very own. His babies, his mate, his kitchen. Stay for dinner? Grace wiped Henry's face and began to clear away the remnants of his meal. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, asparagus, salad, bread, and macaroni and cheese. Awesome. Becca looked up at Jack as he put her down, her face expectant. Will you stay? He knew without a doubt that he was welcome. He was family, as they were to him.
Sounds good. I'll even set the table. Typical. Show up after I do it, Kate said. Grab an extra bottle of wine from the rack behind you. I'm off duty, boss man.
Jack snorted and waited to see if Cade would rise to the bait. Cade just raised one of his eyebrows.
Must be why you're here, mooching dinner. I'm here to look at your women. All lovely ladies you don't deserve.
Becca giggled and patted his hand before reaching to take her dad's.
Fine. For meatloaf, I can get the wine. He looked down at Becca. And some milk for these sprouts.
He and Cade spoke about nothing in particular as Cade put Annabelle into her toddler seat. Grace returned with Henry, who happily sat in his high chair now that he had been topped off. Becca put some crackers on his tray and he grinned before shoving 2 of them into his mouth. Dave, Cade's cousin and Grace's personal guard, strolled into the room and put the potatoes down on the table.
Yo, Akio says to check your voicemail. He had to make a shift change and wanted you to know about it in advance.
Jack laughed as he poured milk for the kids and wine for the adults.
Akio's been one of my top lieutenants for 10 years. I'm sure whatever choices he made were appropriate. You people would have outsiders think I'm an ogre. You are. Other things I can't say in front of the children, too.
Dave sat across the large table from Jack.
He appreciates your respect. You do a good job with your people. Don't repeat that. I have a reputation to uphold and all. Secret's safe with me.
It pleased him that people thought he was good at his job. He worked hard at it, had spent his entire adult life protecting the national alpha pair and the pack itself. Protecting wolves nationwide because they were his too. He knew he was feared, but being respected had to go hand in glove with that, or he'd have gone too far. No one spoke for several minutes as food was dished up and people started eating. Slowly, folks began to talk and laugh. Becca talked about school and Jack relaxed happily. This was his life, and even before he'd met Renee it was good. But now that the ache, the longing for Grace was dulled by his attraction to Renee, it felt even better. The what-ifs were all things he could have instead of those things he never would. He had a future, filled with possibility. It washed over him, bringing a satisfied smile to his face. Grace finally sent an amused look Jack's way. Are you going to tell us or what? You've been a terrible tease to hold it back this long.
As it happens, I do have something exciting. I met my mate today.
Everyone began speaking at once and Jack continued eating until things calmed down. Finally, true to his nature, Cade whistled and told everyone to quiet down. He turned to Jack, a grin on his face.
What's the story? Where is she? Why are you here without her instead of claiming her?
Of course Cade would ask these things. Because Renee was Jack's mate, she'd also be one of Cade's pack, wolf or not. Cade took care of people. He had been born and bred to be an alpha, and Jack was his right hand. They'd been through a lot together, had forged a family of wolves there in Boston, and all across the country with Cade at the helm. He was proud to be part of the new future they'd all forged, when they'd taken Warren Pellini out 5 years prior.
She doesn't know about being my mate. It's complicated. No, don't get that look. It is.
Jack shrugged.
She's human. Well, more than human. She was dripping magic. I'm pretty sure she knew I wasn't human, though. She was attracted to me. We had amazing chemistry, but she's with someone.
He sighed.
So I had to let her walk away. For today, anyway. As for where she is, at her house, I'd wager. Hardest thing I've ever done, watching her turn a corner, knowing she was going to someone else. Yeah, that part.
He sped ahead, cutting off the question he knew Grace would ask.
It wasn't a man she smelled of. She had cat on her skin, in her hair. She lives with this dude, I can tell that much. I don't know why, though. Cats aren't one for casually living with partners.
Well, what did she say exactly? Grace's frown was brief, but Jack caught it anyway. He wasn't sure if it was that he'd found someone, or if she worried about him getting hurt, or a combo of all those things.
I asked her out. She told me she was with someone and said no. But I know, my nose knows. She was interested.
He didn't go into any more detail with kids at the table, but her body had warmed to him. He scented her arousal. It wound around him, tying him to her, needing more of that scent.
She's mine. But I'm going to have to show some creativity with this woman. I have to approach the situation carefully and be strategic.
Grace exhaled, her impatience clear. Despite her size and how quiet she usually was, she was just as much an alpha as Cade. Jack hid his smile behind his steepled fingers. Can it be that she's mated to this cat? Well, no, it can't. Of course it can't, or he wouldn't have connected with her that way. She put more potatoes on Cade's plate and added some more meatloaf to Dave's. Too bad for the cat, then. No one else can have her. She's Jack's mate, and that's that. She decreed it, so it must be true. He loved that about her.
Of course she is beautiful.
Cade looked to his wife.
From what I understand about big cat shifters, they don't mate. At least not like wolves do. They imprint on their partner, a sort of chosen mating rather than the genetic mating we have. Maybe that's it, in which case, well, let's not go there. It's probably that they're together but not imprinted. Makes it easier and yet harder for Jack, I'd wager.
Cade tipped his chin in Jack's direction.
I'll call my grandmother to see what she thinks.
Leah Warden was an elder of the Cascadia pack, and had been the alpha before Cade, and then her other grandson, Lex, took over. After years of knowing the woman, Jack was convinced she also had some serious magic-type mojo. She knew a hell of a lot about shifters and their history, so she'd most likely have some answers. Answers would be good. Give him more tools to blow Renee's house down.
Thanks, Cade. I'll call after dinner. With the time difference, she should be home from her afternoon volunteer gig at Gabby's school by then.
Gabby was one of the Warden nieces, the daughter of Cade's brother, Lex, and his mate, Nina. They also had 2 sons and a house that was chaos personified. Jack wasn't sure how Lex handled his bossy but undeniably sexy wife and all those high-energy kids, but the alpha of the Cascadia pack seemed quite happy with his lot in life, and that was what Jack wanted, needed. Galen heard her key in the lock and put his book down, moving to meet her in the entry. He missed her, loved this time every day when they came together after work and relaxed. His day had sucked. He'd been in and out of court, had a million phone calls and emails and an argument with his brother. Seeing Renee smile as she came through their doorway eased it all away, soothed his cat, while comforting the human on the outside, too. The setting sun came through the bank of windows on the far wall, highlighting her hair, bathing her with warm light. She never looked away, even as she dropped her bag on the table near the door, Something smells good. She came into his arms where she belonged and nuzzled his neck. Goose flesh broke over his skin, and his cock strained against the zipper of his jeans. How perfectly she fit there, made for him. That's much better. Hi. You smell way better than anything else I've ever smelled. Why is that? He kissed the top of her head and tipped her chin. Every freckle, the sweep of her lashes, the curve of her cheeks, the dimple just to the left of her luscious mouth, all burned into his memory.
Because I'm yours, right down to the bone.
He inhaled her, tasting her day. The sharp scent of wolf wafted from her ever so faintly.
Why do you smell like wolf?
He wrinkled his nose as his cat puffed up, affronted by the scent on its mate. Her nose wrinkled for a moment as she thought. Wolf? I don't know. I wasn't near any animals but you today. She grinned.
Funny. No, a shifter, not a full wolf. It's just a thread of scent. You probably brushed against something at the shop, not knowing. There's a pack here in Boston, the pack, if I remember correctly. I've met the alpha male, Cade Warden.
Werewolves? Awesome. I'm totally going to keep my eyes open from now on. What else is real? Mummies, zombies, vampires? He sent what he hoped was a quelling glance, but given her smile, he doubted it.
You worry me sometimes. Vampires, yes. I don't think so with mummies and zombies. Though technically I suppose mummies exist in that there are bodies preserved after death that way. None of that matters though, Renee. Whatever exists will be something to approach carefully or not at all. Stay out of trouble.
For such a small and utterly competent person, she did manage to get caught up in stuff from time to time. I can't tell you what it does for my ego that you seem to think I'm one of the Scooby Gang. She rolled her eyes. I did totally plow into some dude as I left the shop today. Made him drop his groceries all over the place. That'll teach him to get in my way. And yet I still got it. He asked me to dinner.
You sure do.
Galen kissed her cheeks, the tip of her nose, and then settled in, his mouth against hers, kissing her slowly but deeply. He swallowed her sigh, relished the way she molded her body to his. She smelled of him, of their home and their bed, of her shampoo and of magic. She tended to deny that last bit, but someday she'd have to finally admit what she possessed was more than knowing when the phone would ring. She also held the scent of outside, of the store, a bit of coffee, sometimes the green vibrancy of wheatgrass or the bite of mango. He wanted to rub himself all over her body, knew she'd not only let him, but she'd love it. I know that smile. She tossed her scarf on the peg near the door and followed with her sweater. That smile means I'm going without dinner. One of her eyebrows rose. Not that I'm complaining. He laughed and took her hand.
One more reason to love you. Much as I'd love to strip you naked and have my way with you for a few hours, you should eat. I know you probably went all day without taking a break.
Knew, too, that many considered her flaky or flighty, but she lived in her head a lot. Not because she wasn't capable, she was. Not because she wasn't intelligent, she was one of the smartest people he knew. But because Renee saw the world in ways most people never could. It made her more beautiful to him, but he knew she struggled to accept it in herself. Look at it this way. I'll just have more energy for the sex afterward if I eat. She pulled away to poke her head into the fridge, grabbing 2 cream sodas and some glasses with ice. I had a smoothie and some yogurt for breakfast, and heaven knows I'm not in any danger of wasting away. She indicated her body, the body he adored and knew every dip, every fall and curve, knew her scent, knew her taste.
Your body.
He hugged her again before drawing her to the table.
You are rich and warm. Your cookies from the oven, brownies with nuts. You are succulent and delicious. If that's because you like to have 2 pieces of pizza instead of 1, I'm just fine with that. I love your body, so get eating.
They sat side by side at their kitchen table, spooning up pasta salad and sharing the sandwiches. They'd bought the loft 3 years before and had spent a lot of time making it their own. The pictures on the walls, the art, the couch so heavy and cumbersome to move, he'd toss it out the fucking window before he'd move it again. These things were a tangible marker in their history. He reached toward her, twirling a curl around his finger.
How was your day other than mowing down an unsuspecting dude?
Hey, he was way bigger. I totally took his apples to the pavement. She sniffed and took a sip of her soda. The usual. Phoenix. She paused at the ridiculous fake name her stepmother had adopted. Was all agitated about some letter she got. Dad came in and took her shopping and to lunch or something because she was calmer when she returned. Calmer than her normal state of up-my-assery, anyway.
Maybe he bent her over something. Always works to get you to relax.
Her nose scrunched up. Ew, Galen. If you're still keeping sex on the menu for later, the comments about my dad and stepmom having sex need to stop.
We all got here somehow, babe. We all got here somehow.
He winked, knowing she'd get all ruffled up about it. Don't make me stick my fingers in my ears and start singing. How was your day? Did you kick ass?
I always kick ass. Work was work. Hit my hours target for the year, so that's a load off.
Kinda stupid to have a billable hours requirement when the damned firm is all family. She stole a pickle from his plate, but he'd put an extra out there specifically for that reason, so he let it pass.
Still have to pay bills, even with family.
Things improve with Max? He sighed and she put her head on his shoulder briefly. Galen was very close to his older brother. The two of them were a lot alike, which was the reason they fought all the time. Max also filled the spot of Renee's biggest fan within the jamboree. He defended her, sang her praises, and generally adored her. In that, they were in total agreement, but they were still brothers and they acted that way.
After I punched him and broke his nose, I know I felt better. Don't know about him, though.
She tisked. Galen, you two have to stop maiming each other. It's very hard to get blood out of your shirts for one thing. For another thing, you're not supposed to act that way with your own brother. He's single. It'll be harder for him to land himself a woman if he's bruised up and battered all the time. If I had a sibling, I would not waste time by punching him or her in the face.
You do know that when you get all judgy on me, it only turns me on, right? All that moral indignation is hot. You're like a school teacher I want to rumple and seduce into doing naughty things.
She blushed, even as she laughed. You know I'm right.
Babe, I know anyone else in the jamboree will definitely think twice before challenging me, Max, or my father, because they know we will kick their asses if they try. They've seen me fight. They've seen Max and my dad fight. This is shifter stuff. You know human rules don't always apply to us.
He shrugged. They were not humans. They didn't solve family issues the same way, and he wasn't going to apologize for it. You guys really need to call yourselves something tougher than jamboree, she teased. A gang. Oh, a cabal. He rolled his eyes at the familiar joke.
We don't need a tough name. I can rip someone's throat out before they can draw a breath. We could be sparkly unicorns and still eat your face off.
I still say if you call yourselves the Hell's Jaguars or something, you'd be even scarier. Better PR. As for eating, I like my face, Galen, but you can eat other parts of me. She blinked her eyes, smiling innocently. Part of her allure, the naughty girl down just a few layers.
But you do taste so very good.
He looked her up and down again.
Are you wearing a bra?
He asked, distracted by everything about her. She called to him, her magic, the way she sounded, the corkscrew curls she hated, but wore better than any woman ever could. The combination was like catnip. Her eyes darkened. Her eyes were the first thing he'd noticed about her back when he'd met her 4 years ago. Amber with flecks of gold and brown. In some light, they looked hazel. Her combination of features, if they'd been separate on other people's faces, would have been odd. But on her, it worked. There was no one like her in the world. Faster than he could put his glass down and move to her, she was in his lap, straddling his body, and those delicious breasts were at eye level. Now you can see for yourself. She arched into him, her hands braced on either side of his shoulders.
Like a present to be opened up.
Taking his time, he slid his hands up her torso, over the curves he loved. She was his. That knowledge filled him, gave him purpose, and satisfied him down to the bone. He licked over the upper curve of her right breast, a breast high and proud, and as he'd thought, totally unrestrained by a bra. Crossing her arms, she reached down and grabbed the hem of her shirt, pulling it up and over her head, tossing it to the side. The way she moved on him, grinding herself against his cock over and over as her fingers wove through his hair, drove him crazy. Magic bled from her, washed over him, inciting his senses. Without pause, he stood and began walking to their bedroom. While he wasn't opposed to fast and hard on the dining room table, he wanted to take his time that night. He wanted to lay her out and love her from head to toe and back again.
I love you, Renee.
He put her down and she finished pulling the rest of her clothes off, her eyes never leaving his body. I love you too. She held a hand out and he took it, following her body down to the mattress. The shock of skin on skin, the rush of pleasure as they connected physically as well as emotionally, knocked him over.
You feel so good,
he murmured as he licked down the side of her neck. The energy between them swirled thick, her magic, his magic, bound together as they were. Each new time he had her, this was the case, more and more connection, a deeper bond. There was no doubt inside him, not with man or cat, that he had imprinted on her and she him. In his world, that was enough. They were married and mated, and she was a member of the Jamboree via her connection to him. She was family. She referred to herself as his wife, and that's most certainly how he considered her too. He'd asked her to marry him all human style as well, and she'd agreed. The problem was, she really wanted all his siblings to accept her, and wanted to have a closer relationship with her father and stepmother, so everyone would be at the ceremony. He was pretty sure that would never happen. Her father was disinterested, and his wife too interested in herself. She didn't care about Renee's happiness and barely tolerated Galen. They'd consistently refused to meet his family or even speak of what he was out loud. Both the Jaguar shifter part and the fact that he was biracial. They liked the lawyer part and he took care of her well, so her father never quite put into words what it was clear he thought. None of that shit mattered. He'd taken to a new line of argument lately, that they needed to just do it because she'd never be close to her stepmother and father, and he'd never get his sister to stop being a bitch and to accept Renee. She wore his teeth on her skin, bore his mark proudly. She opened herself to him in a way he knew she never did with anyone else. They were united. But there was something. He didn't know what. He only knew she felt it too. The air held expectation. Something was about to happen, something that would change them. There was no fear. He knew what he felt, knew it was genuine, and he knew without a doubt Renee returned those feelings. Still, as she was fond of saying with that smirk/smile she so often wore, you know what they say about cats and curiosity. Her scent drew him in, made the other thoughts fall from his head. His lips knew her, his hands, fingers, cock. On his knees, he looked down at her, at those lush lips, at the sleepy half-masked eyes banking a fire just for him, her curly hair in disarray around her face. Her body, petite but lush, was the most perfect thing he'd ever seen. Curves, dips, valleys, the puckered tips of her nipples, the scar on her hip, the birthmark on her left wrist. She began to speak, hesitated, and smiled instead. He knew how she felt because he felt it too. Her palms slid down his back, urging him closer. She leaned up enough to kiss his thigh, licking closer and closer until that mouth, hot and wet, reached his cock. Just a wisp of her touch, but enough to bring a moan to his lips. Renee still couldn't quite believe the man in her bed was hers. That someone who looked like Galen would even take a second glance at her, much less treat her as if she were the most precious thing he'd ever seen. Acres of taut caramel skin beckoned as she slid her palms against him, over the flat belly, across hard thighs and toned shoulders. He was so incredibly gorgeous, she never quite knew which part of him to look at first. His muscles flexed against her touch. She knew they were bound. The brilliant strands of the ribbons of emotion held them, drew them together, not stifling, but assuring. Being with Galen, thinking about him, gave her comfort, even as it titillated her with the need to taste, to touch, to pleasure, and take pleasure from. just as he'd imprinted on her, she had with him. Their magic, so very different, had reacted, melded, and they'd bound themselves together. She belonged to him, body and heart. His cock, fully erect, lay in her line of sight, and she leaned up a bit to lick the head, tasting the sweet salt of his body. He groaned her name, the sound wrapping around her, pulling her closer. The power in this, the way she knew with her hands and mouth, with her body, she could bring him to his knees, bring him pleasure like no one else, filled her, heady and sticky sweet. Rolling to her knees, she locked her gaze with his, falling into those brown-black eyes. One hand on his chest, over his heart, over the spot where her name lay inked into his flesh. She pushed until he gave in and fell back to the bed. Inky dark hair, just a bit longer than it should be, spread around his face as she leaned down to kiss him. His lips, as always, brought a shiver to her. So very good. That mouth. Kissing mouth, body, pussy. It didn't matter what part of her he touched with his mouth. He did it always with an intensity of purpose. Now was no different as he kissed her with slow sensuality. Galen knew her body, knew her heart like no one else ever had. With some regret, she left his mouth and kissed down his neck, across his chest, down his very sensitive side, across his lower belly until the hands gently cradling her head tightened, urging ever so gently downward. She looked up, into his face, met his eyes, and smiled. "Did you have a request?"
"My cock does, and I'm its spokesperson."
She laughed. "I suppose it wants to go to Target to get some socks." Her laughter died when he caught his bottom lip between his teeth.
No.
He swore in 3 languages when she licked up the line of his cock. "Sexy bastard. You taste very good. I think I'm addicted." Wrapping her hand around the base of his cock, she angled it to take him into her mouth.
"Good God,"
he mumbled as he arched into her. Over and over she licked and swallowed, kissed and sucked. Over the years, she'd come to learn what he liked and what he didn't, but it didn't feel boring or repetitive. Each time she was with him this way, she learned something new about him and herself as well. She knew he was getting closer. He hardened impossibly more. The electricity of his climax charged his skin, arced between them, stealing her breath. He moved his hands to her shoulder, squeezing gently.
Stop. I want to be in you. I've been thinking about it all day."
She sighed, sad to part with his cock that way, but pleased to scramble atop him.
"Impatient."
He rolled her to her back.
"Let's be sure you're ready."
"Ready? I'm ready, believe me. Put your cock inside me already." She writhed as he licked over her nipples, left to right, over and over, until she nearly panted.
"I'll be the judge of that,"
he said as he continued south. "Well, okay then." He nudged her thighs wider and settled in before delivering a devastating lick from her gate to her clit. A secret benefit to having a man who was a cat shifter? The tongue. Whatever cat thing he had, which thankfully did not include a barbed penis, ouch, meant the broad nubbed surface of his tongue was like a sex toy or something. She laughed and he paused.
"You thinking about my tongue again?"
"Yes. Now get back to work." He didn't just give marvelous oral sex. She'd never, ever had a man go down on her and bring her as much pleasure as Galen did. What was there to complain about? Oral by a man who wanted to eat her alive with a super sex toy tongue. Bonus. He pushed her hard, his mouth insistent, demanding. He took her from aroused to arching, begging, and gasping out in climax, in what felt like seconds. Her muscles still trembled, spasmed as he reared up and the head of his cock nudged against her, pressing inside her body. More. Oh God, more. Deeper. Digging her heels into the mattress, she pushed against him, taking him deeper inside. Caught between amusement and desire, Galen stared down at her as he thrust deep and pulled nearly all the way out. Greedy. And she was. She may have looked like a sweet little pixie, but in truth, his woman liked it hard and fast. Not that he'd complain. She also liked it all the time, which made her a rather perfect match for him in that department. "And you love me anyway?"
Yes, I do."
He sped up, enjoying the jaunty bounce of her breasts as he plunged deep, fast, and hard. Orgasm rode him, urged him on. White-hot pleasure spread through him, outward like a blast as he guided her hand to her clit, and she gasped, her pussy contracting around his cock. It didn't take very long for her to start coming again, thank goodness, because at the first hard squeeze, she tipped him right over with her.
"It's always this way with you."
He pressed a kiss to her temple as he collapsed next to her on the bed. She stretched, more like a cat than she ever knew.
"How's that?" "I can't get enough. 1 touch is never enough. 1,000 touches aren't enough."
"Is that a bad thing? Do you resent not knowing if what you feel is real or the result of the chemicals between us? Between me and your cat?" He rolled to face her.
"My cat is hotter for you than the human part is. My cat doesn't care about whatever human conventions demand. My cat just wants to love you and fuck you and keep you safe. What anyone else wants, be damned. My human agrees, but realizes it's important you're along for the ride willingly. Don't doubt any part of me. I've never given you cause to, have I?"
She shook her head. "No, I don't doubt what we have. I just seen some of your family seem upset by it. By you and me together when you have females within the jamboree who they think you should be with."
Anger coursed through him. "What happened?"
He saw her hesitation, and it was his turn to shake his head at her.
"Tell me, please, babe."
"Beth. She came by the shop today in the morning. She's pregnant." He only barely resisted the urge to grab the phone and call his sister to kick her ass. The only thing preventing that was the knowledge of how much he'd hurt Renee that way. He'd deal with Beth later.
"I know, she told me earlier today."
He paused.
"You know what she's like. I'll talk to her. She knows better than to hassle you. Anyway, so what? You know she's damaged. You and I will have children when we're ready. And she has nothing to do with us."
"Mentally damaged. She's a human phobe, or whatever you want to call it. Your genes are too precious to waste on my weak human ovaries." He was going to kill his sister.
"My mother dropped her on her head a lot when she was a baby. I told you long ago not to listen to her because she's an idiot. Did something happen today other than that?"
He smoothed his hands over her skin, needing the contact. She sighed and snuggled closer. "No, not really. I guess it's just... It feels like the air right before it rains. Something will happen. Soon. It's making me impatient, I suppose."
"I feel it too, sweet witch. You and I, though? Nothing wrong there. The only thing I'd love more is if you married me all human-like."
He nipped her shoulder playfully, but left a mark. A mark she loved and would look at again and again. Renee couldn't really explain why to anyone but him, but that he'd mark her, make sure everyone knew she was his. It turned her on and made her feel safe. "We already said we'd get married next year. As for everything else, of all the things I know in the world, I know you and I are okay and will be. You are my cornerstone, my foundation. I just wish I knew what it was, this thing we're waiting on." She knew that to be true more than anything else she'd ever known. Galen was hers, and she his. They would be together when they were old and gray. She'd have his children, and yes, they would get married, though she'd prefer to just go to City Hall and do it quietly than have some big event. Susan didn't really care about Renee, but she'd want to take over and spend lots of money, Galen's money, on some swank affair with 11 million guests she didn't even know. That wasn't who she was, and it wasn't who Galen was either.
"Soon enough. Now let's finish dinner. I'll make you a lemon drop and we can watch a few episodes of Buffy before bed. Oh, and more sex later."
She rolled off the mattress, padding toward the door without bothering to put clothes back on. "Of course more sex. You think I'm with you just for how smart you are?" She winked at him, loving the rich sound of his laughter, as he jumped up to follow her back out to the table. Chapter 3. Jack looked around the shop as he entered, wall-to-wall woo-woo. He wondered if Renee was one of those new agey types, Wondered if she would put crystals in the windowsills and refuse to make decisions if Mercury was in retrograde. But none of that mattered. None of it mattered, because he'd accept her quirks much the same way he knew she'd accept his. Excitement warmed him. He'd not been this interested in pursuing a woman ever. Which was as it should be, of course. She was the one, after all. Getting to know her would be fun. He didn't even have to search to find her. He felt her before he laid eyes on her. Spice? What was that? Following his senses led him around an aisle of shelving, and there she was. A huge smile on her face, cat-eye glasses perched on her nose, a tight t-shirt with some sort of sweater over it. She wore little or no makeup, and her hair curled around her face in no real pattern. And yet she was the most breathtaking woman he'd ever seen. She was unexpected. The citrus and cinnamon of her scent mixed with the pungency of mango, the sweetness of strawberries. He shook his head, trying to free himself from the siren song of her existence, but then let go, let himself fall into it because it was hers, and that was how it was supposed to be.
That looks really good. What would you recommend?
He leaned one elbow on the counter and sent her his very best charming grin. Well, look here, it's Jack. Hello, Jack. Her smile in return caught him in its artlessness and lack of guile. Not that she was naive or innocent. There was definite mischief there dancing in her eyes. But she wasn't trying to sell him anything, not trying to get him to have babies with her. Though, holy shit, did he want to have babies with her? That rocked him. He liked kids, other people's kids, though. Kate hadn't been kidding about the impact of a mate bond. He wanted to bury himself inside her, wanted to take care of her, to build a whole lifetime. For a man like him, the depth of that need took him by surprise. What he'd had always seemed like it was enough, until he stood there looking into Renee's face and came home. How did a male process all this stuff and keep his shit together? His estimation of Cade went up a few 1,000%, knowing he'd dealt with this intensity of feeling and had managed to deal with the fermenting war at the same time. Still, Jack realized that despite the challenges he faced, the biggest, most important thing was that he had met her. He knew this woman before him would be tucked next to him at night, every night for the rest of his life. How he'd work it all out wasn't clear just then, but he would. There was no reason for him to believe fate would put Renee into his path and not provide a way to work things out. He took a deep breath and kept his composure. Barely.
You do have me at a disadvantage. You know my name, and yet here I am not knowing yours.
She laughed. Not beautiful, lyrical laughter, but a full-on, throaty laugh. He bit back a groan at the raw sensuality of the sound. Are we pretending you didn't come in here after I left last night to ask where I was? Busted. Here he was, an enforcer, supposedly the biggest badass in the country, and he'd been busted by a smidgen of a woman. Good thing he'd been best friends with a woman this size who could scare any smart man twice his size. Grace Warden would like Renee a lot, once they got over their initial hatred of the other. The stories about the first meetings between Grace and Nina Warden after Grace and Kate had mated were legendary. Getting ahead of himself, he needed to focus again.
It's my turn to blush.
Blush? She cocked her head and looked him up and down. Why do I get the feeling blushing isn't something you do very often?
Given the right circumstances, I totally blush.
He bet she could get him to blush all the time. Like when you get caught checking up on a girl who tells you she's with someone? Her smile faded into something else. She froze, blinking her eyes rapidly, cocking her head as she looked at him.
Are you all right?
He didn't smell fear or anger, but clearly something was going on with her. His wolf pressed against the human skin, alert, needing to protect and comfort. Well, now this is interesting. You're a wolf. The wolf Galen scented yesterday. He looked around. Someone approached and she shifted her attention, smiling brightly at the newcomer. Hey, Pete, the usual?
With a shot of wheatgrass too, please.
The guy leaned against the counter and sent moony eyes at Jack's woman. Effortlessly, Renee put a bunch of stuff together and used the blender to mix it. Pungent and sweet scents married, carried along with her essential spice. She slid it to the other guy with a smile. He thanked her, dropped some money on the counter, and toddled off, oblivious to Jack's glare. And that's when he saw it, the bite on her shoulder. She'd been marked by this cat, which meant way more than a simple dating relationship. Now, for you. Renee looked him up and down, her shirt falling back into place and hiding the bite mark once again. Obviously you need something with protein in it. She turned and began to fiddle with stuff.
How about a coffee? I'm not one for health food.
He hoped he didn't sound grumpy, but he felt it anyway. And then he let it go. She was his, and this cat, whoever he was, wasn't going to keep him away. Renee wanted to roll her eyes at his tone, but stopped herself. He was a freaking werewolf, and he wasn't one for health food? Something inside her bolted. No, he was going to take care of himself. You'll have a smoothie. She assembled an orange mango power smoothie. The protein powder would help keep his energy up. She made them for Galen twice a day. Shifters needed extra protein and calories. Coffee would not do.
You're very bossy.
One of his eyebrows rose, but the smile on his face made her nervously giddy. I am. You're a werewolf. She shrugged. The world was so magical, most people simply had no understanding of the dozens of layers the world had. This made her laugh, and his expression made her laugh even harder. Susan/Phoenix looked up from her perch behind the counter, but soon went back to chatting with her customer.
How do you know?
Wonderment, not anger. From a very early age, she'd known things. She'd known when the phone would ring or when something very good or bad was coming. And she saw. Most people looked around and kept from bumping into things, but Renee saw. At certain angles or in the right sort of light, she saw within people, their true nature often revealed, and they had no idea. Many times, Renee wished she didn't have any idea either. Some people's true selves were not so pretty, and most of them were human and not supernatural beings. She pushed the smoothie his way. Drink it, and I'll tell you. She should not be playing with him this way. This one was so very clearly a predator, but she couldn't help it. It amused her to push him around. This was dangerous. The man was way more than the normal flirty customer. This man got to her. Part of her wanted to run, warring with a part of her who needed to follow this path with Jack Myers to see where it ended up. It was more than flirtation. So that made her wary. She might like to look at a handsome man in a totally carnal way, but that didn't mean she'd actually do anything about it. Renee loved Galen de la Vega more than she could ever put into words.
Is this like dingleberry nuts with some tree fruit hand-harvested by tame monkeys in the Amazon?
His silly tease brought her attention back to him, to that surfer's face with those big white teeth and eyes that held a teasing light. You're psychic. I'm the executive director of the Tame Monkey Union. He stilled a moment and sent her a smile she felt way down to her toes. And, other places, too. She'd seen that smile in many an alpha male's face. Male shifters were a handful, and she wished good luck to the woman this one settled his attentions on. But she already had an alpha male shifter who wanted to take care of her, and one was more than enough, even if this one was a whole bunch of hotness. She would never risk hurting Galen, and she'd certainly never break the trust they had. But there was something here. Something she felt like she had to let happen. That evening, she'd discuss it with Galen to see what he thought of the situation. He took a sip and one more.
Okay, you win. You and your monkeys. It's good. What is it?
Other than dingleberry nuts? Which, by the way, you do know what a dingleberry is, right? He grinned again. Her whole system redlined for a moment, and she had to start coring strawberries to tear her mind away from that face.
Is there like a 14-year-old boy living inside you?
Sometimes. Anyway, banana, mango, strawberry, apple juice, and protein powder. Oh, and some frozen yogurt to make it like a milkshake. How many calories a day do you have to put away?
How about I answer all your questions over some lunch?
Jack, you're very handsome, and I'm totally flattered. But I'm with someone. I told you that. I'm in love with him. We live together, and we're married.
Human married? Not mated?
In every way that counts, yes. She narrowed her eyes at him, but before she could say anything else, his phone rang. With an agitated sigh, he looked at the display and picked up.
What?
He barked as he answered. She tried not to listen. Well, that was a lie. She tried to listen without anyone knowing she was listening. But he did that male guttural thing, grunting single-word answers.
You owe me so big.
He hung up, and when he turned his gaze back to her, she felt it like a shove.
I'm sorry, work. He put a 5 on the counter. Keep the change. I'll see you tomorrow, Renee. We can talk about where to go to lunch then.
I'm not going anywhere with you, Jack Myers. I told you I'm taken, she called out as he left. What do you think you're doing? Susan Phoenix approached once the shop emptied out a bit. What are you talking about? Renee wiped down her counter and did her best not to be agitated by her stepmother's presence, or to let her make Renee feel guilty over something she hadn't done. It was a near thing. For pretty much most of Renee's life, the woman had sought to keep her under her thumb, to tear Renee down when she felt it was necessary. The woman was all about drama and emotional outbursts. She had been since the first time she'd gone out to dinner with Renee's father. Of course, she'd been Susan back then. The facets she'd seen in her stepmother hadn't always been so bright and full of love. But some things didn't bear obsessing over. The past couldn't be undone. She didn't doubt Susan/Phoenix loved Renee's father, but the feelings between the two women were far more complicated. Obligation was there, but love? Renee didn't believe her stepmother had the capacity to love anyone but herself and Renee's father, and him only marginally. There was more jealousy than affection, which Renee used to regret, but she was too old to feel sorry about other people's choices. She made her own, good and bad, but she always tried to protect those she loved and cared about. However, being accused of something when she'd never given any reason for anyone to doubt her really pissed Renee off. This guy. He's the one who came in here last night. Do you want to blow things with Galen by cheating so publicly? Are you really so stupid that you'd risk yourself this way? Don't be dumb. He's a great catch even with the drawbacks. Renee put the cloth down and turned her stare to the other woman. Drawbacks? Cheating? What the hell are you talking about? Of course Galen's a great catch. That's why I'm married to him and live with him. That's why he and I are engaged to be married in my world, too. That's why I love him. As for Jack, I made the guy a smoothie. A guy I've seen exactly twice in my life for maybe a total of 15 minutes. I didn't have sex with him. I run a retail cart. Interacting with customers happens every day. Men and women both flirt with me every day. He's a customer. He flirted. I told him I was engaged. He wasn't rude. What should I have done? Slapped his face for asking me to lunch? You have bad judgment, like your mother. Susan/Phoenix threw up her hands like she was just so fed up with the world. Fucking drama queen. This had become a bigger issue over the years as her stepmother began to insult Renee's mother more and more often. Not much made her angrier. Renee's mother had died when Renee had been 7. Susan/Phoenix hadn't entered their lives until her father had moved them to Boston a year later. He'd been married to her for 20 years, but it didn't make Susan an expert on Cindy Parcell, and it certainly didn't give her the right to ever make disparaging comments about a woman people said only good things about. Fact was, even if Cindy had been a $3 handjob whore, it wasn't up to Susan to say one negative word. Renee shut down rather than punch someone. You have no right, Susan. Now leave me alone. You said whatever you needed to say. The day went on, annoyingly long, but it had been busy enough that Renee hadn't had any time to obsess or stew over her fight with Phoenix earlier. When she closed up, she walked past the front counter and said nothing. The walk home did her some good. She kept a brisk pace, took in the sight of the leaves changing, the scent of dark coming, and let go of the anger the best she could. The condo was empty when she got home. Galen's absence made the place a bit chillier, made her feel a bit more lonely. Galen was her best friend. She wanted to share with him about the fight today, wanted to talk to him about Jack. She'd lacked close friends growing up. When her mother had died, her father just sort of distanced himself from her. They'd never really gotten that closeness back. Her life had been one thing, and then it was suddenly something else, and she'd never really been allowed to look backward. Looking backward was difficult, cloudy. They'd avoided discussing it, and Renee had never had the opportunity to talk about it with anyone else, because her mother's family had refused all contact with her years ago. No one else knew her mother before. It felt like a dream sometimes. Maybe a hot shower would help, and a glass of wine or two. By the time she was nice and relaxed, Galen would be home. She'd pounce on him and, in the afterglow, tell him about her day. She knew she'd feel better once she got his input. Galen looked up from the stack of papers before him. The clock had to be wrong. 8 already? Damn. He pulled his cell phone out and saw he'd received one text message from Renee some hours before. Not nagging, just a question about what his schedule would be that evening. And he'd been offline and in the middle of this damned case for hours, without even realizing how late it had gotten. Working late wasn't that unusual for him, and she didn't keep tabs, but they kept each other informed about their schedules. He dialed home quickly. Her voice, when she answered, made him feel immediately better.
I'm so sorry, babe. Time got away from me. I had the phone off during a conference call, and I must have forgotten to turn the ringer back on.
Okay, no big deal. I know what your job can be like sometimes. When are you coming home? He heard her rustling around and knew she'd perched herself on the big couch with blankets, a glass of wine, and a movie. Holy shit, did that sound good. Unfortunately, as he looked back at the screen and the pile on the desk, that wasn't going to be happening anytime soon.
I got a case dumped on me this afternoon. I need to file a motion tomorrow and get this brief done by Friday. I'm sorry to say I won't be home for another several hours.
Oh, okay. Well, I understand. Can I bring you dinner? Have you eaten?
Had he?
God, it felt like forever ago that he'd eaten last. A big lunch after court and then another meal when he'd met with Max and had been given the case he was currently working on.
I'm going to order something right now. I promise. You sound funny. Are you okay?
She paused, and the soft sound of her sigh tore at him. I'm fine, just tired. If you promise to eat, I'll probably just go to bed early. He sat up at the emotion in her voice. Sad, lonely. His system responded, needing to rub himself along her body to comfort, to give affection.
I'm coming home now. I can work on this tomorrow. I'll just come in early.
No, you won't. You have a job to do. I can hear how stressed you sound. I'm going to order your food the minute we hang up. That way I know you're eating right. This woman. God, how she got to him. Under his skin, into his heart and soul.
I can hear how you sound. You think I'd just abandon you when you're so obviously having a bad day?
You're going to make me cry. Stop it. Really, I'm all right. Just a crappy day, that's all. Nothing earth-shattering. I got into a fight with Phoenix. She said stuff about my mom. There's this thing happening I wanted to run by you. None of this is urgent. We have the weekend. We'll talk then.
You need to move your cart. There are better locations for you, and then you won't owe her anything. You won't have to deal with her every day. It's not good for you.
Which was an understatement. Phoenix always had an agenda. He didn't trust her at all, and that she made Renee so unhappy drove him insane. He'd been trying to convince her to move the cart for the last year, but she stayed, trying to have a relationship with her father. Phoenix was toxic to Renee. She sighed again. Cool. Not the Susan thing, but the fact that I was just able to order your dinner from Luke's via their website. You need to call downstairs to have the doorman let them up. He laughed.
Thank you for taking care of me, babe. I'll try not to be later than 1 or so. What did you mean by thing happening?
The wolf you scented was this guy I ran into last night. The apple guy? I saw his inner self when he came into the shop today to get a smoothie. It feels odd. I wanted to bounce ideas off you, get your take. Everything went still inside him. A cat with his woman in harm's way.
Does he scare you? Did he harm you or threaten you?
No, not like that at all. He's very nice. Or not threatening, anyway. Odd as in unusual. It's complicated and long, and I wanted your opinion. I'll tell you about it tomorrow night. Really, I promise. I'm okay. I just miss you and I'm tired. If you have to stay super late, just sleep there. Coming all the way home at 3 to have to get back there by 7 seems pretty silly when you have a place to sleep and spare clothes there. I hate you being out that late.
I'm coming home when I finish. I want to sleep next to you tonight, like I do every night. Drink some tea, read a while, and then go to bed. I love you.
I love you too. Be safe and eat every single thing I ordered for you. When he hung up, he made sure to deal with the delivery instructions for the doorman, and then he dived back into his work so he could finish up and get home to her. Chapter 4. Jack groaned as he shuffled from his bedroom into the kitchen. Too early, too bright. Way too short a time between the moment he'd dropped into bed and that very second, and he itched to see Renee, to hear her voice and revel in her scent. Since that couldn't happen any time very soon, he needed to get some coffee. That was thing one. Coffee, something quick for breakfast on the run, and back to Cade and Grace's. There'd been an incident at Grace's health clinic. A male whose mate had been injured severely in a car accident some months before had shown up angry and full of blame for Grace. Then there'd been vandalism and a fight between two neighboring packs down south, and Jack had to get on a conference call and threaten to maim people if they didn't get their act together. Just another insane day as the national pack enforcer. Busy, agitating, but thrilling and satisfying too. He gulped coffee as he nuked a breakfast burrito and thought of Renee. Wondered how the rest of her day had gone after he'd had to go so quickly the day before. He'd thought of her, even as he'd been so busy he'd been rushed off his feet the entire time. The day outside his door was clear, the morning cool. He'd need to go on a run in the next few days. All the pent-up energy of the need he felt for Renee, his desire to claim her and win her too, put him on edge. At the same time, he wasn't panicked. It would happen. She was a human woman. Most wolves had to court their human mates before they made it through the claiming. His father had been human, his mother a wolf. They dated for 7 months before having unprotected sex and performing the ritual that solidified their mate bond. As long as she let him in, he could move more slowly than he would have if she'd been a wolf. He arrived just in time to walk Becca to kindergarten and drop Annabelle off at preschool as he pretended not to keep an eye on Grace. Grace brought Henry to the clinic with her a few days a week, and the roly-poly 16-month-old grinned at passers-by and talked non-stop to his mother as they went. She listened intently, laughing and speaking to the boy like he was making sense, and contentment settled around Jack at the wonderful familiarity of the moment. Dave, Grace's personal bodyguard, appreciated the backup, and Jack never interfered with how he did his job, so things were fine by the time he got back to the house and sat down with another cup of coffee and a plate heaped with a real breakfast.
Appreciate you getting here early to go with them all this morning. Everything okay?
Cade asked as he read whatever was on his BlackBerry screen. Shortly thereafter, he turned to his food and to face Jack. Of course he'd shown up to escort them safely. It was his job and his pleasure.
You know your wife. She's not going to let something like this get to her. I interviewed the male last night. He's falling apart. Deep down he knows Grace isn't at fault. But he's watching his mate have to go through painful physical therapy because so much damage was done through the accident. Even being a wolf couldn't spare her entirely. Cade nodded. He wouldn't punish the male too harshly, because he understood what it meant to be afraid to lose one's mate. Becca is at school. Annabelle is at preschool, and Grace is at work along with your son and their bodyguard. No shots fired, no new graffiti. She's calm and relatively happy, even with an increased guard presence at the clinic today. I left them in good hands to come over here and listen to you yammer on all day about work crap. I need to head out in a little while to go see my woman.
Cade's smile softened for a moment as Jack spoke about the Alpha's family, but his sly amusement returned at Jack's last comment.
Did you tell her this yet, that she's your woman?
Jack snorted.
Not yet. But Cade, she looked at me yesterday and knew I was a wolf. I don't know how. I had no time to follow up because she told me she was married right after she said she knew I was a wolf. And then you called and I had to rush off. Sorry about that. I really am. Married or shifter married. That's what I said. She just said in all the ways that count, which means not human married. What it does mean, I don't know for sure. I just know I would not have met her if I wasn't meant to. I know it. I think so too. For us, fate is strong. You're meant to be with this woman. Until then, well, I know what it's like not to have your mate. I know what it feels like to have such strong feelings about my anchor. I've noticed the difference in you. You're relaxed, satisfied. It's good to see. It's good to be. I know it's partly the mate connection, but she's exceptional. I've never met anyone like her. I remember the moment Grace walked into the room when I saw her the first time. Before I got close enough to scent her, I wanted her. I was fascinated by her. I still am. The truth is, Jack, no one else is like her. No one can be. And while she's not the only female on the planet you'd have a potential mate connection with, she's the one you met first. You're meant for each other, and she is unlike anyone else you've met or ever will.
He totally got it. Jack had heard the mated males talk about this stuff, and it seemed natural enough, but he couldn't have understood, couldn't have known the immensity of what it meant to man and wolf to find home in another person. Until Renee. Now he did.
Yeah.
Cade put his cup of coffee down and looked to Jack with a raised brow. Jack sat back and waited for it.
My grandmother called a few minutes ago while you were out.
He only barely resisted the urge to lean forward.
Look at you with that casual taunt. All those years living in the same house as Nina honed my skills.
He grinned, and Jack didn't doubt it. Nina Warden, Cade's sister-in-law and anchor bond, was a sharp-tongued woman, no doubt, and gorgeous. Lex Warden was a brave and lucky man.
Okay, consider yourself successful. I'm curious, what did she say? She said you should call her at 1 hour time since she was going to an early yoga class and then to breakfast with my mom. Now I have the image of my grandmother and Lycra in my head, so you should know how much I'm doing for you to facilitate this. She did tell me to relate to you that it was possible for you to mate with Renee, even if she was already imprinted by this cat. She said some other stuff, but it was like 5 in the morning there, so she'll fill you in more when you talk to her.
Jack breathed a sigh of relief. It was possible. The next hurdle would be whether it was probable. It was no small thing if she'd imprinted with this other male. So he'd wait to talk with Leah, and then he'd go see Renee. Galen woke up, his arms around Renee, the need for her, as always, thrumming through his veins. Her scent, sleep-warm, sexy, and his, rose to his nose, and he buried his face in the softness of her curls. She stirred, and he didn't push, just waited for her to wake up on her own. While Renee was one of the sweetest women he'd ever met, giving and compassionate, she was not a morning person. He'd learned that the hard way. She was a sexual being, but if he pushed her to wake up too fast, she'd pop him one. Something he admired. Something that made her an awful lot like the female shifters he knew. Though he didn't share that fact with her. He knew there were problems with some of the females in his jamboree. His sister, Beth, was one of the females who reacted most strongly. Luckily, his mother adored Renee, as did many others. But there was jealousy, and no matter how kind Renee had been, they just didn't want to be won over. He'd warned them all off, and it reminded him he needed to talk with his parents about Beth and what she'd done earlier in the week to Renee. "You're all bunchy," she mumbled, not moving her face from where she'd buried it in the pillow.
"Bunchy?"
He smiled.
"Here?"
He rolled his hips, grinding his cock into her thigh. Not." She rolled to face him, slowly opening her eyes. God, she was beautiful, even when she frowned and looked slightly dangerous. "Look at you. It's ridiculous for anyone to look as good as you do in the morning. Makes me grumpy." He risked life and limb to steal a quick kiss and laughed at her expression.
"Babe, you're gorgeous. Every morning I want to eat you up."
Don't move." She got up and headed into their bathroom. He heard the water run and the sound of teeth being brushed. The sun was beginning to pinken the sky as she came back to him, sliding under the blankets and into his arms.
"Better?"
"As better as can be at this hour. You never told me what was making you bunchy." Very perceptive eyes took him in.
You never defined bunchy for me, babe. When you use Renee speak, I need a dictionary sometimes.
You're tense. Not so much now that you think you're getting some morning sex, but earlier. Your muscles were bunched up.
Am I?
Bunched up? Leaning in, he drew a deep breath, his lips just touching her throat. His system went into overdrive.
Getting morning sex.
You're going to get your junk punched if you don't tell me what had you all stressed out.
God, you're sexy when you're like this.
She pinched his side, not to hurt, but to get his attention. He tried to not laugh, he really did, but she was a tiny scrap of a woman who wouldn't even let him kill a bug in the house if he found one. Fierce, yes, but did he worry about her ever harming him on purpose? Not so much.
Let's fuck. That's much nicer. I was just thinking about family and work. Nothing earth-shattering.
Why do men think they can do that and get away with it? She threw the blankets back and got out of bed again. Damn, this was not the way he planned to spend his morning. But before he could say anything else, she spun and glared his way. The beast within sighted its mate, a female that, despite being physically small, was not small in her ferocity or her ability to bring the pain should she need to. The moment stretched and the anger left her stance. "How do you do this to me?" she murmured, moving back to him, taking his hand and letting him draw her into bed once again.
"Because I'm awesome."
She rolled her eyes, but didn't make any move to leave again.
"Because you know I adore you and your strength. Because I know you and I love every part of you."
Yeah, that might be it. She leaned forward and laid a kiss over his heart. "Beating for me?"
"Since the first moment I laid eyes on you."
"How much time do we have before you have to rush back to work?"
"You do realize," he began as he looked at the clock on her side of the bed,
"how difficult it is for me to not give my sexy smile of triumph." "No limit to your classiness." He didn't feel classy when her hand found his cock, squeezing just the way he liked. He rolled, pinning her with his body, and she wrapped her legs around his waist. Hot and wet. He closed his eyes against the rush of pleasure as his cock brushed against her pussy. So damned good. A groan rumbled through his body, echoing through his bones. "I love when you make that sound," she whispered, a sly smile on her mouth. "Your cat knows me." He laughed, a sound swallowed in another groan of delight as he sank into her body, surrounded.
"My cat does. You're mine, babe, cat and man, just one heart, and you own it."
God, you're good at the words. Rolling her hips, she took him deeper. "And this too. I don't deserve you, Galen." He kissed her to silence the doubts he knew she bore about him, more from the place of seeing her involvement with him as keeping him away from what he was supposed to be doing. As if anyone in his jamboree, anyone but her, could see him the way she did. The soft spaces of her body, the cadence of her breathing, the silky stroke of a stray curl as it brushed against his skin while he moved over and within, all wove together, told a story he yearned to hear over and over. Their early morning coupling wasn't about sensuality. It wasn't a slow seduction. It was hard and fast, bodies meeting, sliding in a slick of sweat, the ache of desire, the spice of their attraction hanging around them. Her nails dug into his sides as she came, her body clasping his with such heated ferocity he had no choice but to give in and climax. When he walked out from their shared bathroom, she was ready to go, holding a travel mug of coffee and a breakfast burrito. "You don't eat enough calories when you're in court all day. I'll know if you don't eat it all, so don't try it." He took them from her after slinging his messenger bag over his shoulder.
"I'm eating this before I get anywhere near the courthouse, or I'd have to fight off those assholes I share parents with."
The coffee was dark and sweet. No milk. Just how he liked it. It was the perfect complement to the breakfast burrito with extra eggs and a bit of jalapeno. He indicated the food with the tip of his chin.
"Spicy. Just like the woman who made it."
"You already had sex. Stop with the flattery. And not all of those assholes would care to have anything to do with me or my burrito, despite how delicious my burritos are." She winked and grabbed her keys as they headed out the door. He took another bite and groaned.
Babe, my family loves you. The ones who count, anyway. I hate that this makes you so upset.
Get over it, Galen. 2 of your siblings hate me, along with about 1/3 of your jamboree. I'm a cat-stealing human bitch, remember? She shrugged, but he wasn't fooled by her nonchalance. Some days he really hated the politics he had to deal with.
You know that's bullshit. It doesn't matter what any of them think. I love you. I'm with you. That won't change.
He looked at the spot on her shoulder he'd bitten less than an hour before. It lay beneath the soft sweater she wore, but they both knew it was there. He'd marked the other shoulder the last time, and it was still there, fading but clear. After he marked her that way, she'd draw her fingertips over it, as if reliving the moment he'd given it to her. That simple gesture was more than if she'd tattooed his name on her forehead. That's all that matters to me. And she meant it. The weight lifted and he brushed a kiss over her mouth.
Good.
It wasn't until they parted at their front stoop, her going one way and he another, that he remembered her call from the night before.
Renee!
She turned around, smiling, glowing with magic and love.
You wanted to talk to me about the wolf? I'm sorry I forgot to ask you about it earlier.
She skipped back to him, kissing his mouth. You were kind of busy fucking me instead, which, given how much you know I like that, is A-okay with me. I'll talk to you about it tonight. We still on for date night?
You sure? I'm sorry I forgot. I came in so late and then this morning, well, you distracted me with all that naked skin.
Need for her hit again, and he pushed it away, focused on whatever she'd wanted to talk about.
I want to hear it.
I know you do. Her smile softened to one he saw rarely, tinged with sentiment he knew was genuine. I know you do, she repeated, but right now I've got to get to work and so do you. It's not urgent. I just wanted to bounce a few things off your super brain. He hugged her.
I'll be home by 6 or so. We can talk while I'm making dinner.
Good. And then you can tell me what the hell is going on with your family that you wake up tense. Since it has to do with me and all. He knew she'd be back to that at some point. She was a bulldog about that stuff.
I'll see you tonight. Be safe today.
I make coffee and smoothies. What could possibly happen?
I don't know. Darling, you know I love you, but trouble finds you wherever you are. I just want to be sure to be there or have you surrounded by people when and if it happens.
She rolled her eyes and flipped him the middle finger as she blew him a kiss with her other hand and sauntered away. I love you too. Don't look at my ass, pervert. Chapter 5. Running late this morning? Susan/Phoenix asked, as Renee came in through the back door. She was actually half an hour early, but that wasn't the point at all. Instead of the retort burning her tongue, she ignored her stepmother and began to set up, which, of course, wasn't what Phoenix wanted, so she came over. You can't just come and go as you please, you know. Just because you're my daughter, you can't get away with this sort of thing. Renee looked up after she'd set the first carafes of coffee to brew. Why are you trying to pick a fight? In the first place, I can just come and go as I please. I don't work for you. I rent space from you. In the second place, I'm not late. I'm half an hour early. Something you'd know if you showed up here before 11 every once in a while. Lastly, you are not my mother. Now, kindly get the fuck out of my face. Phoenix paled a bit, not used to Renee defending herself, especially not via the F word. I've told your father we were too permissive with you. You don't show any respect for all I've done for you. Your mother didn't raise you. I did. What do you want from me? I am grateful. I appreciate all you've done. But that doesn't give you a license to attack me when you get bored. I've never done anything to you. I always behaved. I got good grades. Nothing ever seemed to make you happy. You didn't always behave, did you? The menace in Susan/Phoenix's voice shook her, gripped her somewhere deep, and she felt lost for a few moments, until the anger rushed in to replace the fear. Renee tried to calm the storm of emotion riding her system, especially when the books on a nearby shelf began to shake, and the window to her right began to rattle. Times like these, she realized she was more than just a woman who knew the phone would ring. And times like these, she hated that she didn't understand it, wanted to be normal, to have a normal life. Get yourself under control. The devil has you, Renee. You get it from her people. I know. Resist it. That was all Renee needed to hear to come back to herself. She sighed and looked back to her stepmother. Go away. Oh my God, I don't want to deal with you. You got what you wanted. I'm upset. Happy? Go away. I'm going to have customers soon, and I need to get things prepared. Her stepmother huffed a breath to let Renee know just how abused she'd been, and stomped off, probably to call Renee's father, who wouldn't stand up for Renee. She knew he cared about her, knew he did what he honestly thought was best in getting a woman to take the place of her dead mother. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't the same as a mother who loved her. Susan hadn't even really been a very good babysitter, though Renee didn't want to believe the woman hated her or wished her ill. But to Susan, Renee was just in the way. Rather than wallow, she just got on with things and moved beyond those people and events she couldn't change. She didn't remember a whole lot about her mother, but what she did, she cherished, held on to in her heart. That's what counted. She had Galen. She had Galen and his parents, both of whom were so very good to her, loving and kind, and made it clear they knew she was good for their son. The rest of his family and the other cats in the jamboree fell all over the place. Some hated her, some loved her, most didn't care one way or the other. It was enough, though. It was enough that she was loved and cherished. And yet, there was an empty space inside her. Luckily, the day was busier than most, leaving very little time to obsess on her stepmother's outward aggression. As she worked, Renee figured she had that month's expenses now taken care of, which always gave her a sense of accomplishment. It seemed to please Phoenix to make cracks about Renee being a kept woman. And while Galen's salary made hers look like pocket change, she paid her own damned way in the world. She wondered, idly, while she sliced bananas for a smoothie, where Jack might be that day, and then felt guilty that she'd been thinking of him. She loved Galen, so why was she even thinking about anyone else? It wasn't as if she planned to do anything, wasn't even as if she wanted to do anything. It was a crush, maybe. Something riding the line between like and crush, that was it. She really wished she'd had the chance to run all this by Galen. Certainly, his way of spending their time before they both had to rush off to work was far more enjoyable than a discussion would have been. She smiled as a shiver worked up her spine at the memory of his teeth on her shoulder, marking her. She touched that spot, the first place he'd ever marked her 2 years before. Each time he did it, it lasted longer. Now that they'd imprinted, the mark would last at least a month before beginning to fade. The mark wasn't a casual sex thing. He did it the same way all male jaguar shifters did. He did it to claim her, to imbue her with his scent, the tattoo of his bite. When they were with his family, she wore sleeveless dresses or shirts, to show it off, to let them all know who she was to him. What she felt when he marked her that way wasn't something she could easily put into words. It was a wedding ring, a declaration of his connection and commitment. It was sexy and caveman all at once, wrapped up in caring. It made her feel cherished and cosseted, possessed but not owned. She could think about the deliciousness that was Jack Myers all she wanted, but she knew that's all it would ever be, flirting and thinking, never doing. Never, because she had everything she wanted and would not jeopardize it, even if she had the very strong feeling he was connected to something bigger. What or why, she didn't know. As if her thoughts had conjured him, she looked up and caught the light glinting off the blonde hair. Their gazes met, and he smiled, sending heat to her toes and a fresh wave of guilt rolling through her.
"Good afternoon, Renee."
He approached, and she saw the similarities between him and Galen right off. Both had that predatory walk. They appeared laid back on the surface, but the eyes took in everything, the muscles coiled just so, enough to spring into action when and if needed. She fought her blush at the not-so-very idle thought of what those muscles would look like naked. "Afternoon, Jack. Your smoothie is coming right up. How about apple, mango, banana today?
Do I have to? How about some coffee instead?
You are such a baby. Fine, get scurvy. See if I care when your teeth fall out and your muscles won't work. You won't be nearly as pretty that way. He laughed, surprised.
Pretty, huh? You noticed.
His look was smug, and she rolled her eyes as she scooped the fruit into the blender.
You sell coffee. How can you be anti-coffee?
I'm not anti-coffee. I love coffee. Have it every day, in fact. But I'm looking at you, and I bet you've been up since before dawn, and I also bet you've had at least 3 cups by now. So I'm saying have some fruit. She poured the smoothie into a cup and pushed it his way. He sipped so cautiously she wanted to laugh. You're a werewolf. How can you be afraid of fruit? She kept her voice low.
You never did tell me how you knew that.
I saw your other self. She shrugged, noticing Phoenix watching from the other end of the store.
It'd be a lot easier if you'd come out to lunch with me so we could speak privately.
That's not going to happen. I told you. I'm taken.
I have so much to say to you, so much I need to explain.
He leaned in, earnest look on his face.
But you've got observers. Your boss keeps watching.
That's not my boss, she said, annoyed. That's my father's wife. She owns the shop, but not me or this cart. His hand tightened on the counter's edge.
Are you not welcome here?
In the light, his wolf shimmered briefly, and she drew a deep breath, not from fear, but from fascination. He was beautiful, and fearsome. It's family. Family is always complicated. He moved his hand, just barely touching hers with a fingertip before drawing away.
I don't like to think about anyone harming you or making you sad.
She swallowed, hard. Why?
Her whisper held her angst at how much it meant to her that he'd say it, her confusion and no small amount of fear.
Not of him, but of what he might mean to her. And then something else, something warm and soft, rushed through her system. She looked to the door and saw Galen standing there, looking so handsome and slightly angry she wanted to fan herself. Instead she watched, unable not to, as he stalked over, his eyes never leaving hers. Galen let out most of his tension when he saw her, when he took in how she responded to his entrance. This was not a guilty face. This was the woman who loved him, who made him blueberry pancakes with that flax crap she didn't think he knew she added. The woman whose body welcomed him any time he wanted or needed it. This was his woman. But the man standing at her cart, that was another story altogether. That man looked at Renee with not just hungry eyes, but with eyes that said mate. That simply would not do. He stalked right behind her counter and pulled her into his arms, where she willingly went, her body fitting to his, just as it had that morning, just as it always had. Her head tilted back to look into his face, her expression pleased but surprised. He kissed her and she hugged him tight. Hi there. To what do I owe this visit? She smiled, the dimple just below the apple of her cheek standing out, drawing his finger to slide through the dent.
Got a call. Said I needed to come by because you had a visitor.
He cut his gaze to the wolf, who met his look with one of his own. Well now, an alpha werewolf too. Renee looked around him to Phoenix, who had been the one to call, telling Galen a man had been coming in the shop to flirt with Renee. Phoenix had made it sound like something far more had been going on. He knew that part had been a lie. Renee was too honest to do anything behind his back. But still, something was going on. The energy crackled between them, all the magic they held buffeting, sliding, caressing, and arcing. Did you now? Renee's voice had gone down an octave and a wave of her power spread outward. He reminded himself to get on her again about seeking out training to use her magic. She had so much more power than she realized, and one of these days she'd end up hurting herself or someone else if she didn't learn to channel it correctly.
Babe, chill. I'm here.
He spoke softly, drawing his fingertips down her neck to the spot where he'd marked her earlier that day. Her breath hitched and he smiled.
She's a busybody, but you have to admit this wolf right here didn't drop by just for a smoothie. I'm Jack Myers. I think we should all talk.
The man was good-looking if you went for that tall, blonde, blue-eyed surfer thing. Which he did. Who wouldn't? He also clearly had a thing for Renee, which brought Galen's cat very close to the skin.
About what, Wolf? She's taken, and I'll rip you to shreds if you try to change that.
Wolf bled into the other man's eyes as Galen's cat showed right back. Renee slapped a hand down on the counter just hard enough to make both men jump, breaking the spell. Enough! This is my place of work. I have a customer on his way back here right now, so hold it together. Renee smiled over Jack's shoulder to an elderly man Galen recognized from the neighborhood.
Busy today, sweetheart?
The man asked, his hat in his hands as he smiled. Renee laughed. Never too busy for you, Mr. Sherman. The usual?
Yes, please. You know me so well. Today, can you add a little something?
Renee paused as she steamed milk, looking him up and down. For you, I think today is a cinnamon day. What do you think? She held up a cinnamon stick and a grater. She chatted with him and Galen watched the old man fall under her spell. She knew about his life, the details of his family, asked after his daughter's new baby, how his garden was doing. She cared about him and he saw that. When Galen looked up, he saw Jack understanding her too, and something more than outrage spilled through him. Phoenix began to hover as Renee blew a kiss at Mr. Sherman and he left, grinning. I see you came by. Phoenix spoke around Renee, addressing Galen. He should have called Renee first, but he'd let himself get spooked and rushed over. Phoenix would see that as taking her side, and for that, Galen felt badly. Not one to be cowed, Renee sent her stepmother a look so frightening he took a step back, resting a hand on her hip. You and I will talk about this later. Renee turned her back on the other woman, cutting her off before she could speak. Her look at them wasn't much better. And you two. If you start marking things with P, I'm out of here. I'm pretty open-minded and stuff, but I do have limits. Jack, this is the husband I've been telling you about. Galen de la Vega. Galen, this is the wolf I've been trying to talk to you about. They looked each other up and down, Galen's heart beating faster at the threat to his mate, to his life. But also something else. It was hard to think there in the enclosed space, with Renee in between them, the scent of her magic on the air. It mixed with his, with Jack's, and Galen didn't know what to think, how to deal with it. Jack exhaled hard, and Renee looked back and forth between them. We can't talk here. She took Galen's hand, bringing it to her lips. We don't have to talk anywhere. It's totally up to you. Jack ground his teeth together, impotent rage coursing through him. The other woman had made Renee angry, had upset her. It was simply unacceptable to see her treated so badly. This other male, Jack sighed. He could see the connection the two of them had, just as Leah had told him earlier that day. Galen had imprinted on Renee, and she clearly accepted that bond, felt it, returned it. Jack knew she was drawn to him. He saw it, heard it in her voice, scented it in the way her body warmed when he came into the shop. There was no mistake. Renee was his mate. Too. He'd argued with himself all day, wavering on whether to come to the shop again. Renee wouldn't be the only female on the planet who he'd be able to share a mate connection with. It didn't work that way. If there were only one person they could mate with, their race would die out. But none of that meant as much as the way she'd barreled into his life. There was no escaping the very real sense of fate at play, of his being meant to make these choices. Who was he to argue with fate? Leah had explained that they could share Renee through a bond, the Jaguar via his imprint on her, and Jack through his mate bond. But did he want that? It wasn't usual. Male wolves were exceptionally territorial and possessive about something as easily replaced as a jacket or a house. They were 1,000 times worse when it came to their mates. Still, as he'd paced and growled at anyone who came near him, he couldn't stop thinking of her, didn't want to. He wanted her, wanted to wake up next to her every day, wanted her scent on their sheets, wanted to bury his face in that glorious hair. All his life he'd settled. He'd lost his own family, so he'd been fostered by Templeton Mancini and his wife within the national pack. He'd accepted his lot in life and he'd been happy with it. But he didn't want to walk away and wait to see when he'd find another woman he could mate with. He'd found this one by total happenstance. He'd bumped into her without expecting it, and that was how it was supposed to be. He wanted her, and he damned well would find a way to have her, or at the end, he'd know he did his all-out best to make it happen, and would walk away with no regrets. Jack Anderson Myers was no fucking quitter, and he wasn't going to start now. In truth, he wanted to rip the cat's arm off, as craving for her intensified and he couldn't touch. But there was something else, something holding him back. He didn't know why or what, but he had to talk to her alone, away from this place, and that woman near the counter trying to overhear everything they said. His wolf approved of how the cat moved his body in between the women, shielding Renee. And he liked, even as he wanted to howl, the way Renee reassured Galen. That sort of loyalty was rare. He knew she felt the same pull to him as he did to her. But she put her man first. Once he was her man too, or instead of Galen, whatever, he knew she'd show the same kind of loyalty and constancy. Constancy. What an old-fashioned word for something he considered more important than just about anything else on the planet. Renee waited as the two men sized each other up, and then looked back to her. Galen brushed a kiss over her lips again, before looking back at Jack.
"Are you free tonight? Perhaps you can come to our house for drinks. 9?
Jack nodded once, and his eyes found hers, warming. She smiled in response, feeling that pull again. But nothing could happen here. Nothing could be said here, especially with Phoenix hovering. Any minute now she expected her father to show up. Renee was sure he'd been summoned. Galen wrote their address down, and Jack took it with a nod.
"I'll see you both tonight."
Before he turned, he took her hand, kissing her wrist where he had before. Her heart sped. Galen still had an arm around her waist, his body pressed to her side, his muscles tightened, and something without words happened when they all three touched. Everything inside of her surged and broke over both men. A warm flow of magic came from her gut, surrounding them. She heard nothing but 3 heartbeats, smelled nothing but Galen and Jack. The taste of honey, the scent of amber, of sunshine and forest all mixing on her tongue as they remained locked for long moments. It was only the ringing of the chimes over the front door that broke the spell. Her father stood there, shocked and then pained.
"What the blazes is going on?"
He didn't even sound like himself. His voice was a stranger's voice, a man totally untouched by emotion. Jack turned, shielding her with his back. Galen put a hand on Jack's shoulder, uniting the three again with that touch. Things began to tumble out of control and her head swam. "Jack, we'll see you tonight. Galen, I'm going home now. I'm done here for today. I want to go home." Galen looked to her.
"I'll deal with him. Clean up and I'll get you home. Jack, go now or this will explode, and the one hurt the most will be Renee," he said in an undertone.
Jack nodded and left, sending a narrowed glance at Phoenix as he did. Galen had a hushed but firm conversation with her father and Phoenix as Renee cleaned up quickly, putting everything away and locking the cart up. She'd done it so many times it was simply routine at this point. When she walked out, it was without a single word toward her father or Phoenix. Galen's arm around her, anchoring her to his side, to the world, in every way that counted, and she needed. Chapter 6. She remained silent until he'd locked the door and she'd hung up her things. "Galen, do you think I was doing something wrong with Jack? That I was hiding something from you?" She looked so sad it pulled at his heart. He hugged her first and then kissed her temple.
"No, I didn't come to the shop because I thought Phoenix was telling the truth, but I admit it, I got jealous that anyone would be there trying to take you from me. Stupid and immature, I know, but it wasn't about you."
He tipped her chin up.
"I love you. I trust you."
"I would never, ever betray you. I need you to understand that." She took both his hands in hers. "I'm yours." He closed his eyes a moment before speaking.
"I do understand that. If I didn't, I wouldn't be standing here right now. Babe, You wear my mark on your skin. You smell of me. You're my mate, and as far as I'm concerned, my wife. This thing with the wolf, it's big. I can feel it too. But I know you didn't try to hide anything. That's not who you are."
She nodded. "Good. I'm so glad. When I saw you come in, I was worried that you believed her." She took a deep breath, pressing her lips to his neck, over his pulse. The scrape of her teeth across the skin there brought gooseflesh and a ragged moan.
"I believe you. I believe in you."
His breath caught as she bit, just hard enough to make her point. He tipped his head back a bit, submitting. Her hands, sliding up his sides, trembled. "You're the only person in the world who understands me. I can't tell you how much that means to me. It's precious." She stepped back and began to peel off her clothing. Rooted to the spot, he watched the unveiling as need pounded through his veins.
"You're a gift, Renee. Do you understand that? Before you, there was just a whole bunch of days and experiences, some really good ones, but none of them half as special as what you do for me."
Naked, the pale sunlight washing over her skin, she stepped close again, reaching to ease his tie off and unbutton his shirt. "I love that you're like this behind closed doors when out there you're snarly and hard." Her smile held secrets only he knew. "Do you need to go back to work?" She kissed his chest, tiptoeing up to reach his collarbone and the sensitive skin at the hollow of his throat. He had a shit ton of work to do, but none more important than her. His own need echoed from hers. His possessive urge calmed by her touch, by the way she'd deferred to him with the Jack situation. The Jack situation. What a fucking ball of complications that was. But she was here, with him, and she wanted him to know that. Not just standing there, but there, in their hallway, with her hands on him, taking care of him. She made clear with everything she was that he was her choice. No matter what Jack meant to them, the relationship between Renee and Galen was safe and solid, and nothing would change that. That reassurance was exactly what he needed. She hadn't done it to be calculating, he knew. She simply understood what he needed and provided it. That she seemed to have no idea of how important that was, when she did it for him every day, sent him reeling. His beautiful witch. "No, I'm where I need to be right now. I love you so much." He groaned when she got to her knees, undoing his belt and trousers, easing them off after he'd gotten rid of his shoes and socks. Like a cat, she rubbed her cheek along his thighs and over his cock, licking his belly, the seam where thigh met body and finally his cock. Just a quick kiss, and she was gone again. She gave herself to him so openly, so freely, and with so much joy. He always found himself utterly destroyed and remade every time they were together.
"Wait," he managed to gasp. "The floor is hard here. Come back to the bedroom where you can lie down, or at least use a pillow under your knees."
Her eyes rolled up, her gaze meeting his as she took his cock into her mouth, as far back as she could.
"Christ."
She let go, licking across the head and crown before saying, "Sometimes a girl likes it hard." Well, he was a goner now. Renee loved this, loved being on her knees, loved pleasing him. He tasted just right. She dragged her nails up the back of his legs, up hardened calves and powerful thighs, up to gentle and then cup the spectacular ass, pulling him closer and deeper. The floor beneath her knees was hard, yes, but on some level she sort of liked it, liked that she needed his cock inside her in some way so badly that she couldn't wait, didn't want to wait to get to somewhere softer. And like she said, sometimes a girl liked it hard. As if he read her thoughts, he tangled a hand through her hair, holding tight enough to sting a bit, but not hurt. Shivers ran through her, tapping into a place a little bit dark. And that was okay because with him, the darkness was safe. She knew it was when they were so connected, when she let go this way, that her magic would seep through her pores, filling the air. It had never happened with anyone else. The warmth of it washed over her, swirling around them both. Dimly she heard his intake of breath, felt the change in the grip in her hair. His control slipped, delighting her. He was close. The hands in her hair began to guide her more as he thrust, at first haltingly, and then he gave up the reins and let himself go. He'd never hurt her, not as a man, not as a cat. They both knew it, and so he let go, rolling his hips, his breathing coming faster.
So good. This is... fuck.
He pressed deep as she breathed through her nose and reveled in the sensuality of that moment, of the raw heat, of the way he filled her senses in every way. He let go and went to his knees in front of her, embracing, skin to skin, his hands sliding into her hair again. His mouth found hers and locked on. Sure, aggressive. His tongue swept over her lips, and she let him in, opened her mouth, and he groaned, the rumble sliding down her throat. A quick yank of her hair and her head tipped back, exposing her throat. She went still, limp, submitting, and the sound he made was more cat than man, a growling grumble that echoed through her bones straight to her clit. His tongue swept down her neck. She nearly came when he stopped where neck met body. He was going to bite her, mark her again. A whimper, not of fear, but of need, slipped through her lips, and he braced one arm around her waist, holding her there. Electric pleasure, brilliant shards of it, burst through her as he bit down. An orgasm, cell deep, rolled from pussy to her scalp as she cried out, holding him to her, her nails digging into his biceps. The grumble he gave as he released her from the bite was nearly a purr, utterly satisfied predator. She was still panting from the bite when he laid her back on the entryway floor and loomed over her, parting her thighs with his body. He licked over each nipple until she panted, not even bothering to stop the entreaties for him to continue downward. Please, if you don't put your mouth on my pussy, I'm going to die. He chuckled against her nipple for a moment, but after a hard nip of sharp, white teeth, he obliged, kissing and licking downward. Thank God he didn't tease. Instead, he gave her a long lick, swirling his tongue around her clit before sucking it into his mouth. His hands held her thighs open as he set about eating her pussy until she shook from head to toe. Her muscles, just moments before, had been fluid, relaxed after the bite. But now they tightened, reaching for peak, readying for climax, and when it hit, the breath whooshed from her, her spine arching, leaving the floor beneath her back. On and on it went until she went limp. He laughed, kissing her belly.
You taste so good. Come on, lazy witch. Let's cuddle on the couch for a bit.
He picked her up easily, and she snuggled into his body, the heat from his skin comforting. The grumbling purr returned as they settled in, her still in his lap, his arms around her body, cradling. She'd been alone for a very long time, and he'd come, just when she was sure she'd be that way forever. He took one look, and there wasn't any way he wouldn't have her. The rush of that, of the attentions of a man like Galen, had made her giddy, even as they'd started a flirtation of sorts. He hadn't touched her for months. Instead, he called her, wrote her letters and cards as he traveled with his favorite brother, Armando. They'd left 2 weeks after she met him, on a trip to Spain to visit family. He'd send her postcards with colorful stamps, the precise handwriting bringing a thrill to her every time she opened her mailbox. By the time he came back, something had taken root, something so deep, neither of them had ever questioned it. The first time they made love, hell, the first time they fucked, it had left them both with scratches, bruises, and her a bite on her inner thigh. They'd lain in his big bed panting for breath as the sun rose. She'd never left, and he made sure she knew he never wanted her to.
You're thinking,
he said it with his lips against her temple. She felt the curve of his smile on her skin. I was thinking about the postcards you sent me from Seville, of the pink and orange stamps bearing the faces of long-dead kings. She still had them. Every single letter and card he'd ever sent her lived in her top drawer.
It was hard for me to leave once I'd met you. I knew what you were to me that first night we met. But when I returned and you stood there waiting on the other side of the customs area, I knew you felt it too.
You think I'd have just let some hot Spaniard/Jamaican get away? I hadn't even kissed you yet, hadn't seen you naked, though I sure as hell thought about it every 5 minutes. I had to snap you up before some hoe got to you first.
He laughed, holding her tighter. Thank God for that. You protected my virtue, babe.
It needed protecting, apparently. That is, if the looks I've been getting for years are any indication of how friendly you were with the ladies before I came along. Men, too. Some women would have been put off by that, by the fact that Galen had been with both men and women before he met her. She just found it hot. He never gave her any reason to feel like he wasn't satisfied with her, so why should she be threatened? Shifters had a totally different attitude about sexuality. Many of them considered themselves bisexual, and they loved where they found that connection. She'd met many of his former lovers, but they all knew the difference between what they'd had with Galen and what she had with him. As long as none of them ever messed with that, whoever he was naked with before she came along had nothing to do with her.
I sampled a few flowers until I found the right one, he teased.
They snuggled for a while longer, until the sun disappeared and long shadows painted the walls. With a sigh, she got up and stretched. Want some tea? She padded toward the kitchen to light the burner under the kettle.
Yes, please.
She touched the mark on her neck, pressing just a bit, enjoying the soreness.
Got carried away, he said, putting his shirt over her shoulders.
His expression was one of utter satisfaction, and she had to laugh. I'm not complaining. She paused, watching him move around the room, totally comfortable in his nakedness. You want to talk? About the Jack situation?
What is he to you, Renee?
I don't know, she answered truthfully, as she scooped loose tea into the cache within the ceramic pot before pouring the boiling water in. I think he's not someone to me, but to us. There's this pull between us, more than attraction. I see gorgeous men every day. Boston's full of them. No, it's something else. But when you came in, when the three of us touched, something happened, and I don't know what it was. I just know that I've been on edge, waiting for something, and I think he's it. What, I just can't say. She put 2 mugs out and turned back to him. But I need to say again that I'm not going anywhere. You and I are solid. I'm with you forever. No escaping for you, mister. He leaned against the counter, and she couldn't help but notice his cock showing some signs of life as she bent to grab the sugar.
Why would I want to escape this? A sexy witch who makes me tea and fills out my shirts in a way I'm certain to remember when I'm in court, and I have to hold my briefcase in front of my lap? Sounds pretty fucking perfect to me.
She put sugar in his tea, 1 heaping spoonful because he was a sugar whore. Cookie, I made ginger snaps.
Makes me want to fuck you right here and now.
Clearly I underestimated how much you like ginger. She winked and put some cookies on a plate and poured his tea.
Back to the Jack thing. I agree we need to hear him out, to see what he's got to say. I'm intrigued enough to follow this up some. If we don't like whatever he proposes, we kick his ass out.
He shrugged.
No harm done in either case.
She hoped so. Jack walked up the block. Without really looking at the address, he knew the way. Her scent hung on the air, calling to him. He only lived about 5 blocks over from their street, had passed this way hundreds of times while jogging or heading to the library. His experience with her, and with Galen earlier that day, had shaken him deeply. He'd left and walked aimlessly for an hour before ending up at home, looking at the phone, looking at his computer, walking through the space he'd never thought felt empty before, and today it did. He raged about that as he'd paced. He didn't want this, whatever it was. Had never imagined he'd have to share his mate. And it was clear that was the choice with her. It wouldn't be some situation where the cat came around to see her from time to time. This male was intertwined with her. Whatever else he may feel, he could see the connection between Renee and Galen from the moment Galen had walked into the shop. Cats didn't have the same sort of mate bond as wolves, yes, but he'd seen the mark on Renee's neck, knew that wasn't casual, knew she had imprinted on the cocky jaguar, as he so clearly had with her. Jack also understood, though he hadn't known her long, his mate was not a woman who made shallow allegiances. He hated that connection, and yet it made him crave her even more. Loyalty was an important quality as far as Jack was concerned. To have a woman like that at his side, a woman who placed value on people and her relationships with them, was powerfully alluring. He wanted to talk to Grace about it, but there was enough complicated emotional stuff between them, and he didn't need what she would offer. She was his friend, and yes, she wanted what was best for him. But there was jealousy when he'd spoken of Renee earlier that day, enough to put his guard up. Jack needed to talk to someone who would know what he felt, what he was up against. So he'd picked up the phone and called Gabe Murphy, an old friend who now had a tri-mate bond with another man and woman. Instead of being an anchor bond to a mated couple, Gabe had ended up mated with both Tracy Warden and the male she'd already bonded with, Nick Lawrence. If anyone could give him advice, it would be Gabe. He listened to Jack explain the situation so far.
I can only answer for me, Jack. I didn't go into the negotiations where I met Nick and Tracy thinking I'd end up in a permanent menage. But the magic is the magic, right? There's nothing to say when you're up against that.
He paused for a long moment. Knowing Gabe was a man of few words, Jack waited until he found the right ones and finally continued.
What is it you want? You know she's your mate. You know she's imprinted with a cat, which means she's married to him. You can find another woman, you know that too. You haven't claimed her, so there's nothing more than attraction holding you to her right now.
Jack shook his head and groaned, knowing he couldn't be heard doing that.
No, it's more than that. More than attraction. It's more like all the potential is there, welling up between us. All the what can be draws me to her like nothing I've ever felt before. I don't want that with anyone else. I can't explain it, but I know I'd never have this with anyone but her.
Gabe laughed.
The first time I saw Tracy, I couldn't quite understand why I'd be looking twice. She was so beyond not my type. But once I touched her, once I touched Nick, it just changed. I know what you're saying, Jack, because I felt it. I know it. Yes, you can. And you would have a happy life with another female next year or in 5 years when you found her. But she's not Renee. And Renee is what you want and who you're meant to be with. And if you're meant for her, it means you're meant for Galen, too. It's not like you haven't been with men, and from how you're talking, they both sound pretty easy to look at.
Even though Jack couldn't see Gabe, he knew his friend shrugged.
It's not a date. Yeah, he's hot, and yes, I'm attracted to him, too. It's a lot to take on, a man and a woman. Another shifter with their own rules. It's going to be hard to work out.
Gabe snorted.
Don't lecture me on what it is or isn't, asshole. I live it. It won't be easy all the time, but Tracy and Nick are worth it to me. Our children are worth it. Fate brought you this gift and these two people. Of course, as you well know, fate's a tricky thing. But if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. You know, I'm about done with all this complicated life lesson shit, you know? I've done my time.
Jack pushed out of the chair he'd dropped into just moments before to begin the walk to the front windows and back. Over and over.
I've never known you to be a quitter, Jack, or a whiner. Life's handed you some challenges, yeah? So what? You think that makes you special? You got out. No matter how you got there, no matter what you endured, you live in an expensive condo with a view of the river. You have people who love you, people who care, and now you've found your mate. So it's not easy and that sucks and all. But you have this thing we are bred to crave. She's right there within your reach, so grab or don't. But don't you fucking why me over it.
Of all the people walking the earth, only 3 would have ever spoken to him that way and walked away without some damage. Gabe was one. He was right, too. So Jack found himself standing there, hand resting on the ironwork decorating the top of the short brick wall, framing the front of the brownstone. He heard laughter, scented garlic, and the sharp bite of greens. Their door gleamed, beckoning his hand as he rapped, using the old-fashioned knocker fastened to the shiny red wood. He heard the laughter as she approached, knew her footfalls as she descended an inner staircase. And then she was before him, her smile tentative but genuine, and he knew, trouble or not, that he'd cleave himself to this woman until he drew his last breath. "I'm glad you found us without any trouble. Come in." She stood back and waved him in, the bracelets on her wrist catching the yellow glow from the street lamp just feet away. The front hall was invitingly warm. Hardwood floors with richly colored rugs led into the heart of the house. It was a duplex. Galen and I bought it and rented out the other half for a year, and then we thought it would be nice to expand, use the whole space, so we started a remodel that following spring. She held her hand out for his coat, which she gave to her keeping. A slice of her belly flashed as she stretched to hang it. When she turned, her mouth had crept up on one side into a saucy smile.
It's beautiful. You two must have worked pretty hard to get it this nice. We learned an awful lot about sanding and stains and how to lay tile. I figure if the law ever turns into a bust, I can lay floors.
Galen strolled out. Renee looked to him, and there it was, the warmth of their connection as it flowed between them. He stood on the edge, just outside the glow they made. Renee reached out, touching his hand with a fingertip. The jolt he felt wasn't static electricity. It was connection of the metaphysical and magical kind. "Would you like to come through for a drink? I've just made a batch of margaritas. Galen made some snacks you shouldn't miss. He's a really great cook." Galen put an arm around Renee, kissing her quickly before turning his attention to Jack again.
"Come on in. Let's talk."
If the hall and the rooms he skirted past had been lovely, the kitchen was a monument to people who loved to cook. He knew he must have looked like a total hick, but he couldn't seem to stop the open-mouthed wonder propelling him through the large room. The center island had a large indoor grill and double sinks. Another range, with a huge oven and a built-in microwave, dominated another wall. The fridge, a gleaming Sub-Zero, made him weak in the knees.
Christ, I don't think I've ever seen a kitchen this fabulous. Not in person, anyway. This is magazine spread stuff.
Jack turned in a circle, stopping when Renee pressed a chilled margarita glass into his hand. "Galen loves to cook these big fancy meals. I love to eat them. It's a good thing." Galen waved a hand at the nearby table.
"Sit down, Jack. If you're hungry, please do have something."
Well, this was awkward. But hot damn did he look good there sitting at their kitchen table. Gah, why? Why did he look good, and why was she noticing this way? She busied herself, filling a plate with the delicious little appetizers Galen made, like they were toast instead of mini gourmet miracles. Maybe if she kept her mouth full of food, she could avoid saying something bad. Great googly moogly, this was good. She grabbed another few little turnover dealies and tried not to shove them all in her mouth at once. Galen watched, amused and proud she liked what he'd prepared so much. Okay, so I never claim to have any self-control when it comes to anything deep-fried or in pastry. He laughed.
"One of the many reasons I love you. When you like things, you really like them."
Cheeky. She put some bits and pieces on a plate and put it in front of Jack. She'd already done that for Galen. Jack nodded his thanks.
"I don't even know where to start. My resume? I'm healthy, enforcer in the national pack. In my pack, 2 wolves share the second-in-command position, enforcer and mediator. I don't know if you know about how packs work. Single, 40, Boston born and bred. I feel like I'm babbling. I guess I am. I don't normally babble. I've been told I'm scary and smooth and all that jazz."
Jack stopped speaking to take a bite.
"How about you just forge ahead? You're not being graded or anything."
Galen spoke to Jack, but held a hand out for Renee to take, bringing her to sit next to him, placing her between him and Jack. She leaned into Galen a moment, needing the contact, knowing he did too. When she turned her head, Jack was closer than she'd remembered. She wanted to say alarmed her, but it wasn't that. It wasn't fear, it was unexpected. Different than she'd ever thought she could feel about any person other than Galen. But there it was. That anticipation, the depth of need, a sort of fascination. It all bound together, hanging just out of reach but never out of her thoughts. He met her gaze, a smile hinting at his lips.
"I'm just going to cut through the bullshit, okay?"
"Please do." Her heart sped, her skin warming. She licked her lips and his breath caught, his pupils swallowing the iris of his eyes for a moment. He gulped down the margarita. The alcohol wouldn't last long for him, so she put the bottle and a shot glass within his reach. Galen surprised her by taking a shot first and then pushing a full shot toward Jack. Their fingers brushed, just briefly, but wow. The chemistry there wasn't something she imagined. Though, she wasn't above imagining it. Hello. The idea of the two of them naked and sweaty, hands all over each other? Wow. Where had that come from? She gulped the shot herself and refilled it. "Sorry. Do go on." They wouldn't get tipsy for long, but she wasn't a shifter, so she could. Of course, Galen could eat 11 million calories in one day and not get fat, either. There were definitely pluses to this whole shifter metabolism thing. Jack looked at her and laughed.
Nervous?
Are you fucking kidding me? Of course I'm nervous. I don't know who you are or what you mean to me or my life. I don't know why I can't stop thinking about you, or why the way you smell makes me sort of forget what I was saying.
Whoops.
Tequila setting in.
Jack leaned in and took her hand. Sweetheart, there's no easy way to bring this up as we sit here at the table you share with your husband and all.
He looked to Galen for a moment, and then back to her.
I'm your mate. That's why you can't stop, and neither can I. That's who I am and what I mean to your life. I don't know how else to say this.
He looked to Galen and she turned her head to see. Challenge hung in the air, but it sharpened into expectation.
I'm her mate.
Galen didn't raise his voice, didn't get up. He sat there, very preternaturally still for so long she began to wonder if she could see him breathing. His gaze locked with Jack's as they stared each other down. Galen put his hand on top of hers in a gesture, and underlined to say she was already taken.
You are. I don't dispute that. But there's more.
Jack leaned closer, his scent drawing her to lean in, taking Galen with her. The tension between them rose, tautened so much she felt pulled by a pretty leash. At the same time, her connection to Galen glittered between them, laced her to both these men in a way that, had she been standing, would have driven her to her knees. It was as if she couldn't breathe once she was close enough. His scent was the only thing she was aware of. It ran riot through her system, jangling nerves, scrambling thoughts.
You call to me, Renee.
Jack slid his thumb over each of her knuckles, sending shivers through her. In her ear, Galen purred, tugging on her consciousness. Goddess knew there was no way to hide how aroused she was right then. Her nipples pressed against her shirt, her pussy slicked. Her clit was swollen to the point that each move she made sent ripples of sensation outward.
Babe, you're throwing off some serious magic just now, and your pussy smells so fucking good. It's taking all my control not to toss you on this table and eat you right this moment.
Renee closed her eyes a moment, trying to keep control. And then Jack reached out to touch her face. Galen's hand shot out, catching Jack's before he could touch Renee. The circuit they made, the three of them in that moment, brought a moan from her lips and a half-growl from both men. She couldn't stop it. Something within welled up and began to flow out. Magic. Shit. So much magic her skin pricked where it brushed against her. She turned, letting go of the sight of Galen's hand holding Jack's. On the way, the grasp had turned into something else. She turned and Galen's eyes moved to her face, roving over each of her features before settling back to her gaze. His lips parted, breathing sped. His cat lurked right there, a shadow just below the dark skin. Slowly, knowing what he was, she moved closer until making contact, rubbing her cheek along his arm, chest, and to the hand caressing Jack's hand. His growl turned into a smooth purr again, his cat realizing her bond was safe.
Babe,
Galen murmured, gasping as her tongue darted around the fleshy tenderness below his thumb.
This is going somewhere. You need to be sure you understand.
The moon was high overhead, heavy with its own magic. That magic called to both men. She sat back but didn't break contact with either man. What does this mean?
I don't know what it means on top of whatever we have right now.
Galen didn't look at her, though. He stared at Jack.
My bond with her won't erase yours. She'll still be imprinted with you. I can't say I love the idea of sharing, but...
He turned to face Renee.
But I want you so much I can't think straight. I want to know you. I want to be with you. We can work the details out. I'm not here to try to break anyone up. When I come inside you, our DNA will change, forging a bond only death can break. It's forever.
Come inside me? Renee struggled to get her head clear. She moved back, trying to break contact, but both men hung on. I don't even know you.
Don't you?
He stood, bringing her to his body, full contact from head to toe, and she drowned in him. All she wanted was to touch him, to taste his skin. to be naked beneath him. "Holy crap doodle," she mumbled, pushing back, moving away before she did something stupid. He moved with her, Galen right behind. They hunted her, and she felt that very clearly. Even knowing that, she found herself responding, even as uncertainty and confusion overwhelmed her. Sexual male scent hung in the air, thick and alluring. The chemistry they had thrummed between her thighs, coursed through her bloodstream. She wanted to lie back and let it take her wherever it wanted to go. She pulled at her arms to free herself, but both males truly thought they were protecting her and held on to prevent her from falling. "Stop, both of you. Just back off. I can't think. I need to think." Galen bent, looking at her carefully. She saw the strain of his control, his muscles tensed, his breathing quick. He warred with his cat, with the beast inside.
"Babe, take a deep breath."
She stumbled back, and this time they both let her. "What is going on?" It all felt so right that she didn't trust it. This was not how she was. Things were happening so fast. She wasn't fast. She was slow and measured. She made choices she'd given a great deal of thought to. The edge of the thrill, the idea of something utterly meant to be, but so outside the realm of what she could believe, was laced with concern. At the same time, she did believe in meant to be. Was this such a thing? Was this moment meant to be, and if so, which direction was she supposed to take? The two of them there so close to her intoxicated her, muddled her senses with exquisite ferocity and sensuality. Before it was only Galen who did that. Now Jack did as well. Her heart sped as she struggled to not just jump on them. Galen licked his lips. She knew he wanted them on her, and she wanted that too. Instead, he held back, his voice taut.
"Renee, it's the mate bond. I'm afraid Jack is right. I can see it when I look at him. I can feel it inside you now. Your connection to him is forming."
Jack allowed himself a small bit of relief. Galen supported it, and that meant he had a chance, a real chance. He knew Renee felt the same attraction, but she was loyal and constant. She would not allow herself to entertain the mere idea of this threesome unless Galen was supportive of it. Even better, the attraction wasn't just between two of them. All three of them had amazing chemistry. For the moment, he had to help her get past her fear. He had to get her to trust him. Renee shook her head as she looked back and forth between them. "Connection is doing what?" "Well, I don't want it to." "Who said that's what I wanted? Who said I'd be fucking anyone else?" Hysteria crept around the edges of her voice. He sent a look to Galen as her need crawled into his gut. He felt sorry for her as she struggled. He only wanted to love her, and he said so. "I'm already in love with someone. I'm already mated. I'm a married woman, and I don't cheat." Jack never took his eyes from hers as he fleetingly brushed his fingertips over the soft skin of her temple. Her shoulders let go of a bit of tension. His wolf was so very close. The moon called that magic, mixed with hers until his hands shook from the need to touch her, to comfort her. He hated the panic on her face, but was relieved to see no fear there.
"Renee, you know me. You've always known me. It's hard when one of the mates is human. It'll be even harder that you have imprinted with Galen. I know this is a lot to take in. I know you love Galen. I respect that. If you tell me to go away, I will. I'll walk out the door right now and never come back."
He paused, taking a deep breath, only to be swamped with her as his hormones surged even higher.
"I want you more than I can explain."
He held his hands out.
"I'm shaking, I want you so much. But I want you to want that too."
Galen raised his hand, slowly, giving her a chance to move away, but she didn't. He tucked a curl, those gloriously riotous curls of hers, behind her ear. His voice was soft, gentle.
"What is it you want? Tell me and I'll make it happen."
She shook her head, dislodging the curl Galen had just put back in place, before plopping back onto the couch. Galen followed, sitting so that his side pressed to hers. Jack watched as the calm slid through her as she let Galen's presence soothe. She looked up to him.
"Jack, why don't you sit too?"
Galen handed her a glass of water, and Jack sat on the coffee table, his knees nearly touching hers. Renee turned to face Galen more fully. "What is it you want, Galen?" I love you and I'm having a hard time here. I want someone else in a way I'd be devastated over if the situations were reversed. What do you think of all this? Galen sighed, and Jack hoped like hell this would go in the right direction. He would leave if that's what she wanted, but he didn't want to. He wanted to stay with her.
I'm not human. I know what it means to live as other. I know what it means to have more than one nature, and I know what it means to find that person who fits into the empty spaces inside. You're that to me. You make me whole, Renee.
She nodded, tears gleaming in her eyes. Jack realized that up until Renee, he'd found himself attracted to or romantically involved with women who weren't overly emotional. Well, amend that. Certainly Nina and Grace Warden were emotional women, but more on the fierce side. Renee wore her feelings on her skin. It fascinated him, touched him to see the emotions play over her face the way they did. It only made her more beautiful. Galen looked to Jack and then back to her.
But you could make him whole, too. You aren't a shifter, but you know there's more out there.
Galen indicated the world around them with the sweep of his hand.
Than most people imagine. I know my cat responds to you on a level only an other would get. Your magic calls to me. Your heart holds me. I'm yours. Period.
He shrugged.
But his wolf is the same. I see how he looks at you. This isn't some game he's playing. I can scent the truth. I can see how you respond to him. I can see your magic envelop him like it does me. I'm not noble. I'm not good. I want you all to myself. But the truth is, you're his too. Fate, the goddess god, whatever you want to call it, has brought the three of us here to this moment right now. What I want is for you to be happy and to fulfill your fate. I think that fate includes Jack. Whether I like it or not, that's the truth.
He paused. And? I can tell there's more, she said. Galen looked Jack up and down before the left corner of his mouth lifted, and Jack felt a shiver of desire up his spine as he wondered what that mouth would taste like.
I'd be lying if I said I didn't find him sexually attractive. I'd be lying if I didn't admit thinking he makes you safer. This makes my nest safer, my mate safer. This makes some part of me I can't even define very satisfied.
She blushed but didn't hide her smile. Jack couldn't find himself bothered by Galen's attraction, probably because he felt it too. The possibility of what this could be stunned him. What do you want? She asked Jack. It was a dangerous question. He wanted everything. Instead, he said,
I'd really like to be touching you right now. Would that be all right?
She looked up with a small smile, but one he needed. She patted the couch next to her and he moved. Barely, he held back his need to fully rub against her, instead content to sit with part of his leg along hers.
I know you don't come from this background. You're not a shifter, but you're something more than human, too. What I want is to be with you. I don't want to date you. I don't want to only see you on weekends. I want you to be my family. And with you, Galen, too. We can make a family.
She took his hand. Before this goes any further, you have to understand something. Family is incredibly important to me. It's not a joke or a way to get around my trepidation over this.
My parents abandoned me, my birth parents. My mother was a wolf, my father apparently human. He couldn't handle what I was, so they dumped me at the hospital, and I spent the early part of my life in and out of foster care and group homes. When I was 8, a man showed up at the foster home I lived in. At the time I had no idea who he was, but he was a wolf too. He'd seen me on the playground, knew enough to know there weren't any pack families in that neighborhood, so his wife asked after me. We don't achieve our first change into wolf until right around puberty. They knew I'd be doing that alone and afraid, and they stepped in. He and his wife became my family. They brought me into their home and into their pack. Family means everything to me, Renee. When I say I want that with you, it's anything but a ruse.
Sorrow washed over her face, followed by contrition. I'm sorry, about your parents and also about misjudging you, Galen interrupted.
I ran a background check this afternoon. No criminal record. Owns his own condo. Has a car, motorcycle, and a boat. No outstanding debt. Pays his bills. Lives within his means. Has a lot of ex-girlfriends.
Jack meant to be pissed, but he'd done the same thing with them just that morning, and the smile on Renee's face wiped it all away. He gave in to his desire to brush his thumb over her bottom lip.
"What are you smiling about?"
Again she shone with her emotions, teasing his senses. "Galen checking up on the man who wants to share me with him. You having lots of ex-girlfriends?" She looked him up and down. Like that's a surprise. Galen's got scads of them too, both genders, and they're all ridiculously gorgeous. She frowned for a moment and then laughed again. The total absurdity of this moment makes me feel like I'm watching a Tim Burton movie.
"It's certainly not what I imagined my mate bond would be like. I figured it would be easy. Of course, when it came to my friends finding their mates, none of them got easy women. Even Grace, who's small and quiet like you, takes all Kate's energy to keep from being steamrolled."
Jack nearly cringed at the mention of Grace, especially when Renee's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. He'd meant to bring it up in a more finessed way. The Grace discussion would be a whole new conversation, one he imagined would go slightly better than the tales of when Grace and Nina Warden met for the first time. Grace meant something to him. He loved her, and up until the moment he'd met Renee, she'd been the one woman he'd never been able to stop loving when he put his mind to it. "Christ, pour me another." Renee waved a hand toward the bottle of tequila, and Galen got up to retrieve it for her.
"You sure about this?"
Galen asked as he handed the shot glass over.
"You're the definition of lightweight."
One corner of his mouth quirked up, and she rolled her eyes in response. She knocked it back and poured one more. Jack looked to Galen briefly, reassured by the other man's expression. He looked far more amused than worried. "Think I can manage it?" With a snort, she got up, moving past both of them, heading to the stereo. Galen watched her move with the same look on his face Jack imagined he had. He liked the way she walked, so very intent on her path. Jack also liked the curve of Galen's neck, wanted to see that body naked of clothes, glistening with sweat. He sat back and pondered that for a little bit. He'd been with men before, though nothing lasting. None of them had ever captured his attention enough to come back for more after a month or two. But Jack had a feeling this man would.
"Just wait,"
Galen murmured in a voice so low only another shifter would have heard. The sound brushed over Jack's skin like a caress. "Don't think I don't know you're frowning," Renee called over her shoulder. Galen snorted and shook his head.
"Never say so, darling. I never frown when confronted with your ass. I'm always smiling and thinking about you naked." Is this the Bee Gees?" Jack asked, though now he was thinking about her naked too. "Renee loves disco music. And you thought she was all sparkly sex magic and hot tits, huh?"
Galen lifted a shoulder as he grinned.
"Wait until we all take a road trip, thousands of miles in the car, and she gets to choose every third time. You can't even drink enough alcohol to make it okay."
Jack laughed.
"I'm already invited on road trips. We both know how this is going to go."
As he spoke, Galen swiveled to keep Renee in his sights. It was clear to Jack she was thinking, turning things over in her head as she fiddled near the stereo. Galen sighed, clearly contented, before speaking again.
"Look at her and tell me, after you've felt that magic wash over you, after you've held her against your body, that you're going to walk away."
It had been the most important feeling he'd ever had when he held her to him.
"If she told me right now to go, I would. I'm not interested if she doesn't want me to. I don't want to force her into anything. And man, I can't believe you're not more territorial. I mean, it works out nicely for me and all, but you're clearly an alpha. I understand what it means to find home in another person."
Galen faced him now.
"I know if fate brought you to Renee and me, you're meant to be here. I also know if you harm her in any way, I will bring pain like you've never even imagined."
Before Jack could respond, Renee turned and his attention was captured again. God damn, she was beautiful. "You guys done talking about my boobs?" Jack grinned.
"I'm not even going to answer that."
"You don't have to. They are pretty awesome." Her smile was lopsided but genuine. The tequila had hit, her voice lost its edge, smoothing into not quite a slur, but she was definitely more relaxed than she'd been a few minutes before.
"He can duck out of answering, but I'll tell you straight. I'm never going to be done talking about them. I happen to enjoy your boobs very much."
Galen smirked and she rolled her eyes.
"Why are you keeping them all the way over there? That last shot leave you a little uneasy on your feet? Not that I'm complaining about it. You're easy when you've been drinking tequila."
"Aren't you the comedian tonight?" "Huh." "You know," she paused, looking both men over, "it just occurred to me that Jack isn't just my type, but your type too."
"What?"
Galen asked, laughing but not denying. "Look at him. He's all blonde and surfer boy good looks. Great body. He looks a lot like, what was his name? The one you were with before the woman before me? Not that I keep track." She burst into giggles and Jack shook his head.
"Come on over here and sit down, Renee."
Jack patted the sofa and she eyed them both again, clearly sober enough to know they both had plans to get her naked. With a raised brow, she made her way over. "Victor, that's it. Victor. The one who propositioned you when he thought I wasn't looking. As if I wouldn't be looking. Hello?" She fell to the couch with a sigh, leaning her head against Galen's shoulder. Galen had the same painful look on his face that Jack probably had when he'd brought up Grace some minutes before.
"It was an invitation for 3.
"Please. Galen, do you think I fell off the gullible truck? He is not interested in vagina. I bet he's never even touched one before. He likes cock. Yours, to be specific." Galen struggled not to laugh. Jack liked their interplay. It was totally obvious they had love and respect between them.
"Well, he was great fun to be with, and that was one of his finest qualities. Still, I said no, and that would be my answer if I saw Jack on the street without any context."
Renee frowned, fighting her own laughter. "Are you laughing at me?"
"Only on the inside."
Galen winked at her. She socked his arm and he caught her hand, gently, carefully, bringing her fist to his lips to kiss. "Do you like boys?" she asked Jack, bold as you please.
"How often do you drink tequila?"
he shot back. She rolled her eyes. "Like this? Only the times a ridiculously handsome werewolf tells me I'm his mate and he wants to come inside me to make me his mate, and my husband seems to be okay with it. So up until now, only like twice a month or so." Jack decided to move past talk and into action. He leaned in, his body just above hers, getting to his knees to get at that mouth. Galen's eyes went half-mast. He made no move to stop Jack, and neither did Renee. In fact, her lips parted on a soft sigh as he loomed over her. When he slid his lips across hers, his body hardened. Everything within him tugged, pulled to her, pulled to this woman he wanted so very badly. Her taste was right. So right, he groaned, deepening the kiss until she opened to him, taking his tongue into her mouth, her own dancing along his. Her hands slid up, beneath the hem of his shirt, caressing his sides and then his back. Need hit like a fever, like a balled-up fist, and it sent him tipping into her, falling so deep he'd never be the same. And he did it willingly, fell, let himself be consumed by her taste, by the scent of her skin, of her pussy and the honey between her thighs. Christ, he never wanted to stop touching her. Everything within him wanted to howl. He'd found her. His whole life he'd known this moment would come, and now that it had, it was the best thing he'd ever experienced. Now that she'd submitted to him, his wolf wanted more, wanted all of her. He hissed as her nails dug into his back, urging him closer. Her body molded to his, fit his just right. Each time she writhed, his cock ached a bit more.
"Are you okay with this? With all of this?"
he managed to gasp as he broke his lips away. Jack couldn't believe he possessed the presence of mind to actually speak. Her eyes opened. He'd never seen eyes like hers, honey gold. Her lashes were thick as she blinked up at him. "Galen?"
"Yes, babe."
Galen leaned down to kiss her forehead, his face very close to Jack's. Without thinking, Jack turned, stretching until his mouth met Galen's. The contact went straight to his knees, to his cock, up his spine, as it seemed to twine around where Renee had taken up residence inside him. Galen nipped Jack's bottom lip as he pulled away. "I was going to ask if we were okay with this, but I think I just got my answer." Renee's voice was thick, and for all of Galen's sexual allure, he didn't begin to shadow what she was to him.
"Are you Okay with that?
Jack indicated Galen, meaning the kiss and more. It feels good. She arched her back, bringing her body against his again, and he groaned. It feels right that this would be about the three of us. If it was me and you, and then me and you, she indicated each man with the tip of her chin, it would bound to end up with people feeling left out.
Yes,
Galen whispered. This couch is too small. Come on through into the bedroom. I think our bed should do just fine. Renee scrambled up and held 2 hands out. Galen took one, and Jack the other. Chapter 7. Okay then, so this was wow, so much more than she'd imagined that something to be. This was huge, hot, scary, beautiful. She was utterly in over her head, and she had no plan whatsoever to stop. She couldn't stop. Her emotions clanged around inside her, driving her. She'd never felt her connection to Galen as strongly as she did right then. Each breath he took, each step he took, she felt. His desire, his need for her blanketed her skin, her senses. His love for her meant she could stand on this ledge and jump, because it would be there no matter what. If she overthought this, she'd do something bad like start to cry or laugh hysterically. It was surreal in the way it just felt like what they were all supposed to be doing. How odd that it took this long in her life to really feel the hand of fate so strongly. Their bedroom was lit by the street lamps outside, and the moon overhead seemed to spotlight directly on the bed. Before she could talk herself out of it, she pulled her shirt off, tossing her bra along while she was at it. Shimmying out of her jeans and panties took another half a minute, and when she turned around again, both men stood side by side, watching her. Okay then. Here I am, there you are. Only I'm naked and you two aren't. It's okay that Galen is here, right? I'm babbling, oh my God, I'm babbling like an idiot, and what are you two even doing here with me? Look at you. She gestured at them both.
Of course it's okay that Galen is here.
Jack took the few steps he needed to get to her.
I'm here with you because there's no one on earth I'd rather be with. Naked is always a plus.
He trailed a fingertip over her shoulder, across the spot where Galen had marked her. A strangled gasp broke from her at that contact. Galen was suddenly there, turning the blankets back and helping to ease her onto the mattress.
There, pretty as a picture.
Galen dipped down to lick over the spot on her neck where he'd bitten her a second time. She shuddered and squeezed her thighs together to try and ease the ache.
I told you nearly 4 years ago, and I'll say it again. You're mine. I take care of what's mine. I love you.
Galen spoke as he pulled his t-shirt over his head, exposing the upper body she'd just rubbed herself all over that very afternoon. Her breath caught, and he laughed. Not to be outdone, Jack got rid of his shirt, too. The pale gold hair on his chest gleamed in the low light and called to her hands. She got to her knees, sliding her palms up the flat belly, over the broad chest, stopping to kiss the scar on his right side. Why do you have a scar here? I thought you guys healed really fast. Behind her, she heard the jingle of Galen's belt and the shush of jeans being shoved down and kicked off.
Silver-tipped knives.
His voice was thin with strain as he took her hand to another spot on his upper back.
Gunshot with silver ammo. Everything else heals just fine. And can I just tell you how pretty you are? Lie back, sweetheart, and let's get a look at you.
As she did, he got rid of his pants and boxers and stood for long moments, totally naked and obviously happy to be there, just looking at her.
You're like the inside of a seashell, pink and fragile but so strong.
He took her ankles in his hands, trapping them with his grip before slowly sliding them up her legs. I don't like that someone tried to hurt you. The idea of him being in danger made her slightly ill. Galen brushed the hair back from her face and took her mouth in a kiss meant to reassure, but quickly began to seduce, to cajole, and possess.
He's dead, and I'm here with my hands on the most beautiful woman on earth. I think I got the better deal. It's part of my job, being attacked.
He laughed softly, and she did not feel like joining him. The sight of his olive-toned skin stretched over the wide shoulders. shoulders holding her thighs apart so he could, yes, take a long lick from her gate to her clit and back again, was almost as sexy as the way his hair felt on her belly against her pussy.
"She tastes like the sea with an edge of sweetness,"
Galen said, and Jack hummed his agreement.
"Do you like that? Does his mouth on your pussy feel good? You look so sexy right now."
He traced his finger around the bottom curve of her left breast, and then around and around her nipple.
"By the way, she comes fast and hard,"
Galen managed to say, right as Jack began to suck her clit in and out of his mouth. Stars painted her vision as she arched, fingers digging into the blankets. Her pussy still clenched, wanting to be filled, when he was there, his cock nudging her open. His struggle to take it slow showed on his face. One lock of hair slid down over his forehead.
"Please, I need you now."
Yes, please, inside me." She squirmed to get more as he began to press inside. It felt so unbelievably good it was almost too much.
"Once I fuck you and the claiming is done, we're going to take our time and do this all over again."
Jack's voice had gone low, his wolf in every word. She opened her eyes again once he started to thrust, sensation lighting up her body with each press. His cock touched parts of her Galen didn't, just as Galen's cock had that swing to the left and nudged her just right. "Okay, I may need to soak in a bath of Epsom salts first, though." She laughed and Galen curled around her from behind. She snuggled into him even as Jack began to stroke harder and deeper. "Yes, like that. Harder. I won't break." The sound Jack made nearly made her come again.
"You like it hard?"
Jack thrust, jiggling her breasts. Yes, I do." She gasped when Galen pinched her nipples in time with the thrusts.
"Me too."
He grinned and began to fuck her in earnest, hard and deep. The bed squeaked a bit. Galen's cock, hard at her back, was just out of her reach. God, she needed it. She needed him, too. All that naked skin, 2 cocks, 4 hands, 2 mouths. The idea of it was enough to make her want to giggle. Instead, she cried out as a hot rush of climax filled her, and then teeth, 2 sets of teeth, sank into her skin. Galen on her shoulder and Jack on her side, just below her left breast. He came inside her and the world tipped on its side as her cry of climax became a sob at the wonder of how it felt to be there, right at that moment. So much magic. It flowed from her until she wasn't sure she could hold it together. Dizziness hit, and she smelled forests and fur, heard the growl of big cats, the howl of wolves. Galen lay there, Renee in his arms, Jack leaning against them both, all 3 panting. Galen had never seen anything like it. She was so powerful, she had no idea, he wagered, just how much raw magics she poured out. It wrapped around them, made him feel safe as his cat recognized her taste and approved of the new flavor. Jack. He felt her. Before that moment, he'd been connected to her. He understood her without her even having to speak. He knew her bond to him was made by choice and by pleasure. But right then, they'd all 3 clicked together in a way that felt as natural as breathing. He felt Jack's wonder, his fascination and adoration of their woman. Jack was a powerful shifter. Galen's cat approved because it meant she'd be safer too. The scent of sex hung in the air, teasing him, bringing his need back even though he'd had her only hours before. "Wow," she mumbled, her eyes still closed. Jack petted her hip.
"Are you all right? I know the claiming can be really difficult for human women. And you did it anyway? Without saying?"
Galen wasn't quite ready to be pissed yet, but it was there, drawn out by any threat to Renee. She looked up at Galen, seeking to reassure him. "I think my connection to Galen made it okay." She sat up. "I can feel you." She touched Jack's chest, and he leaned into her touch. "I feel you in my head and in my heart. And you." She swiveled to speak to Galen again. "I feel you, too. In here." She pointed to her belly and heart. "You were there before, but this is different. This is deeper. I've never—" She started to cry, and both men, distressed and confused, rushed to comfort her.
Please don't cry. I don't want you to be sad. God, I've never in my life felt so happy." I've been so lonely at times. I suppose I thought it was normal, so I just accepted it. But now I feel home. I feel full. I feel like I belong, and that you and Galen belong to me."
"They're good tears. This is good." She cupped Jack's cheek and then Galen's. "I'm overwhelmed, but not sad or scared."
"Oh, good. I'm glad. How do you do it, Galen? How do you keep your hands off her?"
Jack looked around Renee to ask. "I have 4 bite marks. Does it look like he keeps his hands off me?" Galen laughed, pulling her to him and opening his arm wider, inviting Jack. The 3 hugged, with Renee's sweet curves in between them. Galen hungered for her with a ferocity no amount of Epsom salts could cure.
"I want you so badly, but I've had you twice today and Jack once."
As he said it, his hand, dark against her belly, slid down, his fingers gently brushing through her pussy. Good thing I like sex, or you two would wear me out. Forget about my ass, buddy. She grinned. But I need you. I need this. She reached down and grabbed his cock, sliding her fist around him, pumping just the way he liked. I've been with you thousands of times, and I still haven't gotten my fill. Bending, she began to lick around the crown. Jack reached out and grabbed Galen's cock, holding it for Renee. Their gazes locked for long moments before Galen was drawn, as always, back to her. He adjusted himself, putting pillows behind his back so he could lean and watch her as he reclined. His beauty as she crouched between his thighs, her mouth on his cock, her hands on his body. Each knob of her spine pressing against her skin called to his hands, his mouth. Each brush of her nipples against his thighs brought a twinge, a deeper need for her. Her scent, her skin, the honey between her thighs, mixed with Jack, hung around them, comforting as it excited. Jack sat next to where Renee knelt, his hands on her, stroking, touching, caressing, like he couldn't get enough, and Galen knew the feeling. Her mouth was hot and wet, the heaven he daydreamed of 100 times a day. Her tongue knew all the best parts of him, pressing just hard enough, swirling, licking fast and hard, slow and gentle. She drove him higher and higher, sucking his cock, cupping his sack, occasionally scoring, ever so gently over the sensitive skin there. Her middle finger extended to play over his asshole. He nearly laughed, remembering her stern warning away from her ass. He knew, when her hand left his balls, that she was reaching down to her cunt, bringing her lube back up. He groaned when the fingers sliding over his rear passage were hot and slick, even harder when she pressed inside, deeper and deeper, widening gently by scissoring her fingers. When she brushed against his prostate, he nearly wept with joy. It felt so fucking good. Something she kept mindful of as she sucked him deeper with just the right pressure and speed.
"Damn it, I'm not going to last,"
he managed to gasp out, right before orgasm barreled through him and into her. It dizzied him, her love, the way she touched him, the way she knew him, and yes, those pale blue eyes watching him as Jack caressed Renee with one hand and Galen's thigh with the other. He let his eyes close, fell back to catch his breath, and just let himself enjoy the moment. When he was able to open his eyes, he saw Renee kiss his belly and look to him with love and acceptance.
"I love you."
She rolled over, dropped a kiss on his lips. "You'd better. Be right back." She headed into the adjoining bathroom.
"You all right?"
Galen asked Jack.
"I've never been this all right. Well, thank you. I know she wouldn't have done anything with me if you hadn't supported it. Even if she wanted to. She would have chosen you and your bond."
Jack flopped next to him.
"She'd always have missed you if I had sent you away. She'd have wondered, and I'd always worry that I stepped in the way of fate, endangering her or you, by not accepting what is so very plain. You're our mate. If I hadn't supported it, I'd have missed that too."
Jack's laughter shook the mattress a bit as Galen watched her silhouette in the doorway to the bathroom. She nearly glittered, she had so much magic flowing. He sat to get a better look.
"Jesus. Babe, you're like gushing magic. I've never seen anything like it." "It's beautiful,"
Jack murmured. "It's a bit scary. Sort of like I feel after 2 glasses of champagne. I don't know what to do with it."
"Come to bed."
Jack held a hand out and she moved to take it, getting in bed between them, and Galen realized how utterly and totally satisfied he was at that very moment her body slid against his.
We'll figure it out. Don't you have a coach or something?
Jack pulled on one of her curls and let go. No. Galen wished she'd open up about this whole thing. He knew enough that her stepmother, despite owning the shop, didn't believe in magic, and had made Renee believe she was unnatural and wrong. There was more there, something dark, but for years Renee had refused to go into it, so he'd let her. He'd tried to research her mother's family, but had come up empty. In fact, their lives before they'd come to Boston seemed a mystery. Her father wouldn't speak about it at all. He barely tolerated Galen as it was, and he didn't know Galen was a shifter. He did know Galen had dark skin and was a lawyer, and that had been 2 strikes already. The stepmother liked him well enough. He kept Renee out of trouble as she saw it. He'd never say it to Renee, but it was also that the woman felt like, with Galen around, they didn't have to do anything for Renee. She saw the expensive suits and figured he'd be a source of financial support, despite the fact that Renee had supported herself since the age of 17. If she hadn't been so stubborn, he'd have purchased her a permanent space for her juice bar as far away from that shop as possible. But she wanted to do things her own way, and he respected that enough to stand back and help however she'd let him. For the time being, but after that scene with her dad and stepmother that afternoon, he doubted it would go on much longer.
No?
It's not a complicated answer. No. Galen laughed. He couldn't help it. She was so full of shit.
Jack snorted. There's a story behind that. I can tell. Just so you know up front, I'm nosy and I like to take care of people. It's what I do and who I am.
Jack sighed and Galen grinned in the dark.
Good luck with that,
he mumbled, and Renee huffed, reaching across his body to turn on the light. He grabbed her and she laughed. Punk, let me go.
Not ever.
Her annoyance melted and she smiled, that sweet, crooked smile reserved only for him. Just 'cause you're all hot and hard and you have a big cock, doesn't mean you can boss me around.
Oh, my sweet, beautiful witch. Of course I can boss you around. You like it.
I like it when you're fucking me, or licking my pussy. Something useful, not when you're poking at me on this magic stuff. I'm just a girl with some interesting talents. Nothing special. Jack growled.
You're special, Renee. Don't ever talk like that about yourself. Sweetheart, I don't know a lot about witches and magic, but even I can see you're powerful. If you don't have a teacher, we'll get you one. I have no idea how we'd find one, but we will. I'll get my people on it when I go back to work.
You can stay, can't you? Renee looked to him, her lashes fluttering, and Galen bit his lip to keep from smiling. She didn't want to talk about it, and she'd make sure Jack forgot. He could never stand against her when she truly wanted something either.
I'd love to stay.
Jack moved to snuggle in on her other side. We'll have to figure out the logistics of all this. Her voice was sleepy, and Galen knew she was tired. So much had happened that day.
Tomorrow.
Galen let drowsiness claim him, satiation, satisfaction. Life was very good. Are you off tomorrow? Renee asked Galen.
I am, but I ran out on a few things earlier. I need to put in a few hours, but it can wait until the afternoon.
She kissed his side before turning over to face Jack. You?
I don't have days off, or I didn't. I guess I will now, or I'd better because you and I have a lot of time to catch up on. I need to go in the morning, though, to explain things to Kate and Grace. They'll want to meet you. You'll be officially accepted into the pack, too. But that's not anything we have to deal with right this very moment.
The alarm clock is on your side. She leaned over Jack to get to it. I realize I'll be giving up having a side of the bed now, unless you two want to sleep next to each other.
Not that I mind sleeping against Galen, but I'd rather sleep against you. This place is nice. We might need a new... Okay, well, we can talk about all this over the weekend. Set the alarm for 7, please.
She groaned, and Galen decided he'd let Jack figure out just how much she hated mornings on his own. Done, she said. I'll go set the coffee maker. She bounced off, happy, and Galen grinned.
You don't have to do that. I usually eat at Kate and Grace's.
Jack got out of bed to follow her. Well, now you're mine. I feed you. Renee began to pour water and measure coffee, pushing buttons on the coffee maker and setting it to start brewing right before they woke up. Galen pinched Jack before he spoke again, shaking his head hard, telling him to shut up. Renee might not be a shifter, but she was not a woman to be messed with, especially when it came to taking care of her people.
All right.
Jack yawned. Good answer. Renee turned to them with a smile. Now, how about some snacks and a movie? I don't have to be up early. Chapter 8. Jack woke up to the scent of his mate on the pillow. Utter satisfaction left him totally relaxed, happy. When he turned, he grinned at the sight of Renee face down, blankets up over her head. One of her arms lay over Galen's belly, while the fingers of her other hand curled around Jack's shoulder. God, she was beautiful. He kissed her shoulder and she snuggled deeper. Her skin was so pale and soft. Needing to see more, he pulled the blanket back, exposing a perfect back leading down to the dip at her waist, and a very gorgeous ass. Ugh. The alarm sounded and he rolled it to turn it off.
This thing is like the fucking space shuttle. How the hell do I turn it off?
He poked at a few buttons that seemed to do nothing. His annoyance melted when a sleep-soft and naked Renee leaned over him to turn the alarm off. He hugged her, jutting his hips to emphasize just how happy he was to see her. What that meant he didn't know, but she tried to burrow back into the covers, which would not accommodate morning sex.
How can I wake you up with my cock if you bury yourself in there?
What he got was a snarl, a snort of disgust, and his hand slapped away. Galen seemed to find this all very funny.
What? While you'll find Our Lady to be sweet and accommodating in many ways, she's not a morning person.
Galen laughed as he got up.
Babe, I'm turning the heater up and I'll close the bathroom door for you.
He looked back to Jack.
She's not a shifter, remember? She gets colder than we do. I've found, he said, continuing into the bathroom to flip on the switch to heat the room, that she's much more amenable to lots of things if she's had a hot shower.
Renee grumbled something into her pillow, deep inside her blanket nest. Jack pulled the blanket away from her face just a bit, enough to see her. What? She turned over and he saw her breasts in the light for the first time. He swallowed and wet his lips. I said, don't talk about me like I'm not in the room, or worse, that I'm mental. He kissed her and she might have been annoyed, but she put her arms around him anyway before swatting him away and rolling out of bed.
I'm taking a shower. Coffee is already brewing. I'll make breakfast while you get your shower.
And just like that, she disappeared into the bathroom after a lingering kiss for Galen.
You okay this morning?
Jack asked Galen.
I mean with everything?
He tossed Jack a pair of sweats.
If you want. I think we're the same size. My closet is here and the highboy dresser is mine. There are underwear and stuff.
He pulled a pair of pajama bottoms on but stayed shirtless.
And yeah, I'm okay this morning. You? I feel...
He paused and pulled on pants.
Satisfied.
He shrugged and followed Galen out toward the kitchen.
I'll need to tell my family today and the rest of the jamboree.
Galen poured them both a cup of coffee.
I'm mated to you, too.
Galen looked up.
Yes? Is that a problem for you? With your pack?
Jack laughed.
No. One of my best friends is a trimate bond. It's a sort of mated threesome. Under normal circumstances, any female mated to a wolf would need what we call an anchor bond. Another male to take on part of the bond should the male die. Gabe, my friend, thought he'd anchor another couple and ended up mated to both.
He shrugged.
So threesomes are not unheard of.
So when were you planning on telling me I had to have an anchor? Because I'm not going to do it. Renee came into the room smelling better than anyone had a right to. Her cheeks were rosy and her skin gleamed like a pearl. He shook himself out of his fantasy when she poked him while walking past to the fridge.
You won't need an anchor bond, I asked. I'd have told you. It's a big deal and I'd never have not mentioned it before the claiming.
There was something truly wrong with him that he found her so sexy, even when she was pissed at him. He needed to tell her about Grace, but he wasn't sure how. He knew the longer he went without telling her, the worse it would be. Effortlessly, she moved around the kitchen preparing breakfast. He sipped his coffee while Galen made some calls and checked his email. Things were easy between them, the silences comfortable, the conversation natural. "Are you going to move in with us?" she finally asked, as she put a plate heaping with bacon, eggs, and hash browns in front of him.
"Do you want me to?"
He forked some food up and sighed happily. Galen sat beside him and blew her a kiss when she gave him his plate. She took a deep breath. "Okay, you don't know me, I get that. But I'm a pretty straightforward person. We're mated, right? Do you think I'd kick you out today? Or move in with you and leave Galen? Share custody of my pussy? What? I wouldn't have opened my heart and my bed, hell, my life to you, if I didn't plan to let you in all the way." She sipped her coffee as she nibbled on toast. "You're mine, Jack. Ours. Of course I want you with me and Galen." He knew it, felt it through their link, but it sure felt good to hear it.
"Will I fit here?"
Galen slid a hand up and down his back.
"We'll make it work. Unless your place is bigger. No, I like it here."
And he did. He liked the feel of the space. "Settled." She bent to rummage in a drawer and pulled out 2 keys. "Here, this one is to the outer door and this one is to the front door." They chatted for another 20 minutes or so, but he had to go back to his place first to change before he went to Cade and Grace's. Renee walked him to the door. "I'll see you later, then?" He put his arms around her and she moved to him with a happy sigh. The kiss she gave him rocketed him straight back into that place where need clawed his gut. "Wow, wow." Her voice was shaky. "I can feel it, the way you need." She slid the robe she wore off her shoulders, and it fell to the floor with a whisper of fabric. "I'm here and awake." With a strangled moan, he moved her against the wall at her back.
"What you do to me?"
She opened herself, tossing a thigh around his upper leg, and grabbed for his button. Then, of course, his phone rang, Cade's ringtone. "Please don't tell me you have to take that," she said, reaching into his jeans and finding his cock.
"I won't."
He ignored the ring and picked her up to get her cunt where he needed it. Cade would just have to understand. It wasn't the urgent ringtone, so Jack was going to fuck his mate right then and there, or die trying. She shuddered and moaned into his ear as he lowered her onto his cock. "Love that shifter strength," she murmured, hard and fast. "I know you have to rush off." She bit his earlobe and he growled, thrusting deep, just like she'd requested. Her nails dug into his sides as he shifted her to rest more against the wall so he could reach her clit with a free hand. "Glory, hallelujah, and all that stuff. Your cock feels so good inside me." The nails scored his skin, and he wanted to fall to his knees, it felt so good. Her words drove him higher. The clasp of her inner walls pushed him closer to the edge. Her clit was hard and slippery against his fingers, and when she came, her body tightening around his cock, the sensation, the pleasure rushing through his body, white noise in his ears and her name on his lips. He did drop to his knees as his orgasm hit with such intensity, he could barely draw breath. She sat astride him, smiling down, the morning sun coming through the window just above their door, lighting the wine and gold in her hair. Magic coursed around her, ebbing and flowing. Within, his wolf stretched and quieted.
"I love you. I know we just met, but I do."
She moved to the side and grabbed her robe as he got up too. "I know. It's big and scary, but it's true. The love is there for me too." He kissed her again, hating that he had to go. His phone rang again and he groaned.
"I'll call you later, okay?"
She nodded and stood in the doorway, watching him leave as he answered. Renee had walked with Galen to his office, pretended to be nice to Beth, who always seemed to be lurking like the stupid bitch she was. Bitch. Well, bitches were just dogs. So would any of Jack's females in his pack be bitches in the figurative as well as the literal sense? Good gracious. Well, that was a lot of mental rambling. Not that she wasn't amused by it. Beth was a cow, but as she was pregnant, all Renee had was mental slapping, since the physical kind would be frowned upon, even if it hadn't gotten her slapped right back by a female jaguar shifter. She grabbed some kisses and left after some I love yous. She knew him. He'd be there for hours. He was a busy attorney, one of the few specialists in employee-side labor law in Boston. It was all acronyms to her, but ERISA was a big deal to those people who needed a specialist, and he was their man. She was proud of that, proud of how smart he was, of how hard he worked, proud a man like him loved her. And now she had Jack, who she didn't know nearly as well. She did hope his pack would accept her. She wanted, very much, to have the people important to him like her. The last several days had been overwhelming on so many levels, it was impossible to really get it all straight. It wasn't just Jack and her bond to him. The magic within her had grown so much it was impossible to ignore. She knew she had a sort of special gift, knowing the phone would ring, or sometimes she'd been able to knock things over. She'd noticed lately when she had been really angry or upset, she had made things shake. But after the night before, all that sort of chaotic noise had smoothed out. She felt like what she had wasn't just about phone calls or having a way with people and animals. It was as if she perched in a sunny spot, and her magic shone all around her. It felt big, like the ocean. Though she wasn't scared by it, she was still wary and impressed, and lost because she had no freaking idea what it was. Most of all, she really wished she could talk to someone about it, learn how to harness it. She hopped on the T and headed across the river to an occult/magic-type bookshop in Cambridge. She'd only passed by a few times on her way to a movie theater where she and Galen caught art house flicks, but she'd always wanted to stop in. Why not then? Maybe they could help her there, refer her to someone. Her men were off doing werewolf and lawyer stuff. Her cart was closed on weekends, and she had the time and the curiosity. But at the end of the block, 4 doors down and the street jam-packed with students, she stopped, a cold sweat breaking over her. She was not supposed to be there. Why, she didn't know, until a man stepped out of the bookshop. She didn't even see him clearly. What she knew was that she didn't want him to see her, though not how she knew it. Quickly turning on her heel, she mixed in the crowd and headed away, back toward the T. The further she got out from that street, the better she felt. But she wasn't going to stop until she got on the other side of the river. Her phone buzzed in her pocket as she slid into a seat and tried not to be obvious about checking to see if she'd been followed.
"What's happening? Where are you?"
Jack demanded when she answered. As the train pulled away from the stop, she saw the man from the shop, standing on a nearby corner, looking around. She ducked, hoping he hadn't seen her. "Nothing," she whispered, not sitting up again until she was sure they'd moved on and weren't going to stop and let anyone else board.
"Bullshit. I can feel you. I can feel your fear. Where are you?"
Her call waiting buzzed, and she sighed. That would most likely be Galen. She bet this mate thing between the 3 of them had made him all sneaky Pete into her head like Jack apparently was. "Galen is on the other line. I have to get it or he'll worry. I'll call you when I get home." She broke the connection over his growled curse and order not to hang up. "Hello?"
"What took you so long to answer? Where are you?"
"Hey, handsome, I'm fine. On my way across the river back toward home."
"Why are you scared? What's happening?"
"I got spooked. It was stupid. I'm on a crowded train in broad daylight and I'll be home in 10 minutes. Really, go back to work. I'm all right. Let's have pizza for dinner. I'll handle the details. I love you." She hung up and ignored the phone when it buzzed again. She needed to hold her shit together, and talking to them wouldn't help that just then. Of course, when the train stopped and she made to get off, she saw Jack right away. Galen stood next to him. Instead of being mad, she simply went to them and let them hug her, even as they chided her for not answering the phone. It felt so good to be cared about, to be fussed over. Stupidly, she couldn't hold back tears, and it only made them worry more about her. Jack looked around the outside of the house and went in first, giving Galen the all-clear signal before they allowed her inside. Galen ushered her to the couch, and they bookended her.
"I'm going crazy here, sweetheart. What the hell has you so spooked?"
The tension rolled off Jack in waves. Even normally laid-back Galen had been replaced by hardcore protector Galen. She told them everything, from the way she'd headed to the shop as if by rote, and then the way she got sick and sweaty, and just knew the man she saw would bring her harm if she didn't get away from him immediately.
"Did he see you on the T today?"
Galen asked. "I don't know. I don't think so. But he was following me, looking for me. I know it."
"Why do you think he was following you? Did you speak to him? Know him from before?"
Jack held her hand as he spoke. "I've never seen him before. I'd have remembered. I was walking down the street toward the shop and I began to feel sick. It was wrong, the air. I can't explain it, but I just knew I shouldn't be there, and when he came out onto the sidewalk, I had to not let him see me. She shrugged. I know it sounds stupid, but I just felt it. There was something about him. I think he had magic, but not like mine. It looked, or felt, different. I don't know. I don't know how I know, I just do. Galen kissed her temple.
Babe, it's okay. We believe you. You practically glow with your magic now. Before I could sense it, taste it even, but last night, something happened. My cat, Jack's wolf. It was a full moon and we all connected, unlocked things within us all. You think maybe he saw it too? Like she's a front porch light and he's a bug? Great, just great. Even better that we're responsible for making her less safe.
Jack frowned. She took his hand. Oh, for goodness sake. You can't be responsible for everything. Then, of course, they began to speak as if she weren't even there. Being annoyed at them was better than being scared, she supposed. Jack leaned forward, around her body to address Galen.
I don't like that at all. What would he want with her? Nothing good.
Galen's eyes shone with violence. Jack turned his gaze back her way.
You aren't to go around by yourself for the time being. Got me? One of us will take you to work. One of us will escort you home. Until we figure out who this guy is and what he wants, you're at risk.
She counted to 10. She knew shifters were this way in general about mates, but in the face of a threat, they got even worse. I appreciate the protection and concern, I really do. But this is silly. You're not going to treat me like I'm 5. I'm a grown woman. I walk around alone all the time.
You did. And now you won't. This isn't about you being 5, Renee, and you know it. This is a dangerous situation. We don't know enough right now. Until we know more, this is how it will be.
Galen's mouth had set. That spelled trouble for her because she knew he wasn't going to give in when he had that face. She narrowed her eyes. This is ridiculous. He shrugged, so gallingly casual.
Suck it up.
She slumped, knowing she couldn't get out of it and not really wanting to. She was still spooked and they made her feel safe. Don't you both have work to do?
Nice try. I finished my work and was on my way out when this all went down. I'm home for the day.
Galen tossed his feet up on the coffee table and she resisted the urge to shove his feet off the wood. She sent him what she hoped was a snotty smile, but he pretended not to notice. Well then, good. You can go to your Saturday rowing thing with your crazy-assed siblings. The De La Vegas liked to row on the Charles every Saturday until the river began to freeze at the shore. Because they were all insane. In any case, it was nice to be able to get out of that because they all had superhuman energy and she, alas, was just a human.
Ha. Not today. There's something for Beth and another woman who's pregnant too. My dad is off with Max to get wood for some construction project he'll fuck up, and we'll have to call in a contractor. They're all busy, and I'd rather be with you anyway.
Jack smoothed a hand down her back and she leaned on him a moment.
I spoke with Kate before I left. I have a few days off, but they'd like to meet you. They asked us all to dinner on Monday to officially welcome you into the pack.
He looked to Galen.
Both of you. There's an official ceremony, but we can do that whenever we're ready.
I have no idea what to tell my father and Susan. Things are already really tense between us lately. I don't know what happened, but in the last 6 months or so, she's way more condescending. Makes more comments about my mom and her family. We end up in a fight of some sort at least once a week. My dad has become more distant with me during this time too. I'm not ashamed of it, I honestly don't know if they care or what.
You didn't tell me it had gotten so bad.
Galen sighed, still holding her hand.
Why don't you just take me up on the offer to lease the space in the lobby of your building? It's the perfect size for you. Easier to deal with than the cart, and it's not dependent on them. And it's protected by my people. No one could get to you. I'd feel a lot better on a few levels if you moved.
Because I can't afford to do that yet.
How much do you need? Whatever I've got is yours.
Jack squeezed in tighter and she found herself surrounded by them. Damn, that was just... Wow, hard to think when all that gorgeous man was up on her. Galen's voice cut through her tingles.
That's not the issue. I've offered to do the same, and she can afford it. But she has this notion that she has to put the exact same amount into the household as I do.
I don't put the exact same as you do into the household. You put in a lot more money than I possibly could. I do all I can. You put a certain percentage of your wages into things, into the savings and utilities and the mortgage. All that stuff, vacations, whatever. I do the same. The increase in a lease or rental for my space is not in my budget. Right now, my schedule is my own. I don't have to work on weekends or at night. I have a leisurely life because of how much more you put into the budget than I do. His sister already thought Renee was a gold digger and basically dumb and shallow. Renee didn't care to deal with the fallout of letting Galen pay for that lease. He thought she was just being stubborn, and because she didn't want to put him in the middle, she just let him think it.
But I'll be living here too. Jack kicked his shoes off, propping his feet on the coffee table too. So that helps, right? You should have enough to do it yourself in that case. The building is owned by my jamboree. All the business floors are anyway. We lease out the rights to the retail space in the lobby and one atrium floor to another company. That company requires the first year's lease fees paid in advance. I could, of course, intervene and ask them to make an exception for my wife. If my wife would allow me to do so, which she does not, I could pay the first year's fees for her, and she could pay me back monthly, if she felt the stupid need to pay me back in the first place. She also refuses that.
Not that Galen's bitter about it or anything. Renee tried to get up, but both men held her fast. I'm done with this conversation now. I'm not going to just let you give me tens of thousands of dollars. And I'm not going to use your family connections to get me a special deal that others don't get. I know I'm not a lawyer or second in command of a werewolf pack, but I have my own business. It makes me happy and it pays my bills. It means something to me that I do it on my own.
Galen hugged her. I know, babe. I'm sorry. I just want to help you. I want to take care of you. I respect what you do, but can't we find a way, a middle way, where we can protect you and you can still manage your own business too? Sweetheart, if you're in Galen's building, you'd be way safer. Let us help you with this. I know we'd both feel a lot better if we knew you were more protected. If you won't just take the money, you can pay us back, in installments or whatever you need.
I appreciate your concern. I respect that you want to protect me, and I appreciate that. I do feel safer knowing you two look out for me. But I'm done talking about it, and we're going to move on to another topic. She totally sounded like a self-help book. She knew she did. But she wanted them to know she appreciated their concern, and still wasn't going to let them take over her entire life. She pushed hard enough that they finally let go and she stood, needing to be away from them right then. It was so easy to give in to all that love and protection, to let them take care of her instead of her taking care of them and herself. But she didn't want that, didn't want to be a freaking dependent. How could she respect herself if she just let them take over that way? How could they respect her in that case? Jack was very nearly close to changing. He'd never felt so close to the edge before. The first jolt of her fear through their bond had doubled him over. He'd been in a meeting with Cade, on a teleconference with several other pack leaders at the time. He'd lurched to his feet, intent on finding her. This wasn't her being startled or nearly hit by a car or something fleeting. It hadn't gone away. It stayed. She was being terrorized, and he wasn't there to protect her. Grace had stopped him as he'd fumbled with his phone. She'd wanted to examine him, but Cade forced her back, allowing Jack to call Renee's phone. She didn't answer right away, and when she finally did, she expected to just go on home and for him to stay at work. And now this fuck-all-crazy idea of hers to not take the help they offered to get her out of what sounded like a very unpleasant situation and into a guarded building with more space.
You can't just walk away from this,
Galen said. I can't? And how do you think that? Thank you both for the offer. I decline. She continued on toward the hall opposite the bedrooms. A door slammed and Casey and the Sunshine Band started up.
I haven't heard Boogeyman in a good long time.
The 70s. Jack thought of that time when his life had been so chaotic, absent any real connections to anchor him. He'd had a beer can novelty radio. He'd won it at some foster kid picnic and had listened to music long into the night, long after everyone else had gone to sleep.
She's got a darkroom back there. Another thing I've encouraged her to do more of is photography. She's quite good at it. But she's been raised to think anything artistic is bad. Raised to think she was wrong for her magic. So she runs her own business, does very well at it, and still gets to be creative in her own way. But she hides her photography by saying it's just a hobby. Stupid Susan. Fuck. The woman owns a magic shop, and she's like the opposite of magic. It's nonsensical.
Galen pushed himself from the couch and went into the kitchen. Jack followed.
So I know more of the story with her family. What's the story with yours? Have you told them yet? I used to think things would mellow out, and over the last 3 years, things have gotten better for the most part. Jaguars are insular. We keep with our kind most often. When we imprint on a human, they almost always take the change. She doesn't want to, and I don't need her to. Your jamboree finds that insulting? A repudiation of what they are? Some do, yes. More at the start. She's really hard not to like. Most of them have seen how much I love her and how much she loves me. They know her decision about the change isn't about them at all, but that she doesn't want to be anything but what she is now. I've known her long enough to understand how very important it is to her to be that. To affirmatively choose to be who and what she is, instead of trying to change for others.
Galen began to rummage through the fridge. Jack frowned.
But the ones who don't? The ones who think she won't change because she's some sort of human supremacist? I've got 8 brothers and sisters. 2 of them don't like her. They feel like she's getting in the way of my choosing a woman in our jamboree, or one who'd change. They don't want me to have children with her. My mother was that way until last year. I don't know what happened. Renee won't talk about it. But whatever it was, my mother has been very supportive of our relationship and of Renee ever since. I thought things were okay, but given the way she reacted today, I'm beginning to think she's not telling me the extent of what's going on. So you haven't told them about me? About this?
Jack wasn't insulted. He just wanted to get all the details.
I met with my father and my older brother, Max, and told them. I'm a grown man, a full member of the jamboree and third in line to take over. I don't need permission or a vote of support. I'll make an announcement of it at the next meeting, 2 weeks from now. I expect most of the Jaguars there will support me. Some won't, though. It's an old argument and things are changing. It's just slow.
Galen handed Jack a soda and moved to stand next to him, both of them leaning back against the counter, staring out the large windows over the neighboring houses, the trees and gardens, and beyond, the barest slice of river.
Let me know what I can do to help.
Jack cocked his head, looking at Galen, letting himself admire him. Galen looked back. Neither of them spoke for long moments. Jack breathed in deep. That hit of recognition shocked through Jack's body. Connection, deep arousal, attraction, need to protect and defend. He turned as Galen had. Where Jack's kiss with Renee had been sweet and sensual, this first kiss between Jack and Galen without Renee involved was hard, raw, a gnash of teeth and tongue. Hands pulling and yanking, hips pressing, cocks grinding through denim. Galen's taste ran through his system, wild and powerful. His wolf responded, growling with satisfaction and challenge. Galen kissed down his neck, pulling his shirt open. The soft tear of the cotton wasn't louder than the sounds they made. Mouth and teeth on neck and chest, over nipples, just this side of pain. Jack arched into Galen's touch as he managed to get Galen's belt undone and pants unzipped. His cock felt right in his hand, slick at the head. Galen hissed, arching, pushing, thrusting his cock into Jack's fist, and bit him. Jack cried out as Galen's teeth pressed into the flesh of his pectoral muscles, just above his nipple. So much pleasure rushed through him, he nearly came from that bite. Galen's hand worked its way around Jack's cock.
"Give it to me, Jack,"
Galen murmured as he thrust against Jack. They were standing close enough that knuckles touched, angled cock to rub against cock, slick and hard. Galen rested his forehead on Jack's shoulder, his neck so invitingly close. When Jack's teeth began to press into that beautiful, dark caramel skin, he growled, holding Galen in place as he came in a heated rush. Not too much longer later, a breath perhaps, Galen followed. The silence after wasn't uncomfortable. Galen moved away, pausing to kiss the spot on Jack's neck, just below his jaw. He handed Jack a washcloth to clean up with, but not before licking up Jack's hand, from wrist to palm. The gesture was tender, sexy, and full of challenge. Loving Galen would be nearly as complicated as loving Renee. The two males were used to being in charge. The challenge of dominating one another would add spice and conflict, too.
I've never expected this. I've been with men before, loved men before, but this is so much more than what I've had in the past. You're beautiful, sexy, strong, all things my cat and the man approves of.
He paused for a moment.
When I met Renee, there was nothing else. She owns my heart in a way no one could ever do. I need you to understand that. You are my mate, I believe that. The bites have tied us closer.
Galen took a drink of his soda.
But she's my first priority.
Jack nodded.
And yours. I agree and understand. Wow, this week, I gotta tell you, has been full of surprises.
Galen shrugged with a laugh.
Do you regret this?
Funny to ask, Jack knew, but he needed to know. Galen shook his head.
No. Despite my inner cynic about most things, I do believe in fate. I believe this is meant to be. That you love her and want to protect her like I do means more because we have a connection to each other as well. Without her, there wouldn't be you. She's the connection. I can't regret her or our connection to you. I agree.
He looked back down the hallway where she'd retreated.
We should get her out of the house tonight. Yes, it's exposed, but she's spooked and really pissed off. When she puts on Shaka Khan's I'm Every Woman, you better know she's still good and mad. If she puts on Patsy Cline, you need to wear a cup.
Galen sort of laughed, but Jack knew their woman was totally capable of it. The music halted between tracks, and Jack wondered if he'd be hearing Shaka and running for the door. Instead, a slow, sultry number came on. Galen smiled.
Etta James. We've turned the corner. Next song will tell us if she's going to be our dinner date, or if she'll be in there another hour.
Both waited, continuing to look out the windows over the city. Silver Sun Pickups came on, one of Jack's favorite bands.
3-seed? Is that good or bad? This isn't a love song, after all. 3 came from one little seed,
Galen said with a smile, indicating the lyrics.
Sounds hopeful to me.
The door opened. Music flowed out and she followed, singing to herself absently as she looked at prints in her hand.
What you got there, babe?
Galen lit up when their eyes locked. A smile bloomed over Renee's features, making her so beautiful in that moment it unfurled something inside Jack. She handed him the prints. Jack looked over Galen's shoulder at the black and white shots he'd laid side by side on the bar.
My parents.
Galen traced the set of hands in the photograph. Clearly, a couple. Hands clasped easily, fitting perfectly. Perched between the feminine thumb and forefinger, the stem of a tulip. The focus had been perfect, highlighting the connection of hand to hand, and through that of the two people not in the picture at all. Yes, you remember that weekend we went out on Carlos's boat? It was just a silly moment, but they're so close, united. It's beautiful. I thought I'd have it framed for your mom's birthday next month. Galen took her face between his hands.
Who am I that I'd be blessed to have you in my life? To see the world the way you do is to remember the magic all around us. Thank you. My mom will love this.
Jack looked at them, at the way Galen touched her so very gently, with tenderness and care. This was his family, the place where his heart lived. They looked at the other shots, one of Galen and a man who had to be a sibling sitting around a fire pit. They leaned toward each other, sharing something clearly mischievous. I want to have this framed for you and Max. You two can put them in your office at work, and then the next time you want to break his nose, you can remember this moment.
God, we're trouble.
Galen laughed, as he shook his head.
It's a wonder my mom never tried to sell us at a garage sale.
She might have, but the neighbors would have known not to buy you, no matter how cute you were. Renee waggled her brows and Galen snorted, kissing her quickly. The others were nature shots, beautiful, simple, and, he noted, from perspectives most people wouldn't have seen.
You see a lot.
He turned her toward him, and she automatically slid into his embrace. Meh, I like to take pictures. It's fun, and that's about it. He began to sway with her, slow dancing in the kitchen as Goldfrapp's Black Cherry came on. He didn't need Galen to interpret this song. She was everything.
I love this song,
he said, just being with her. Me too. This is a great sex CD, he agreed. When you two recover from your interlude, you can show me.
Our interlude?
Galen asked, still leaning against the counter, watching them, an amused smile on his lips. I know what pussy smells like after sex, and I know what the air smells like after you've come. She writhed against Jack, and his cock quickly let her know he was just fine to go again.
Does that bother you?
She leaned back as if he'd dipped her, the long line of her neck exposed. His wolf approved mightily of the gesture of total sexual submission. The sound of her laughter, the way she glowed with pleasure and contentment. He knew the answer. No, gorgeous, not at all. As long as there's a place for me, I have no negative opinions of it at all. It's hot. You can let me watch sometimes, though. Jack laughed as she straightened again.
Galen and I think dinner out would be good. What do you say?
Don't you need to move some stuff in? She got to her tiptoes to kiss him before twirling to the counter to get some tea. Oh, and I moved all my stuff to the closet in the guest bedroom. You can share the big closet with Galen. I moved my dresser in there too, so there's room for yours. Oh, and I moved my stuff from Galen's office and put it into my darkroom area. I don't need it, and you may.
You moved that dresser? Damn it, Renee, that's a heavy piece of furniture. I could have done it.
Jack just met her smile with one of his mate, making their home open to him.
Thank you, sweetheart. I don't want to push you out of your office space.
I have a really large space outside the darkroom. It's well lit, and I have my computer in there anyway. I don't do a lot, not enough to need half of Galen's office. If you need or want an office of your own, we have the guest room too.
All I need is a space for a computer, a printer, and a fax machine. A lot of my work is going to meetings and talking on the damned phone. I'm fine sharing with Galen, if he is. It's a big space. Plenty of room for another desk. I've got a fax machine and a printer, wireless through the house, and my computer has teleconference capability, so you're welcome to use it too.
They discussed the logistics of all the stuff he wanted to keep, and that he didn't really care about. He made some calls and arranged to meet with some friends in the morning to move the big stuff. He'd put the condo on the market in a few weeks after he'd gotten settled with them. She flitted around, chatting with them, clipping herbs from the pots in the window, making more tea, filling the space with the sweetness of her energy. It made him so unbearably happy. Galen smiled, his gaze tracking Jack's.
Yeah.
She turned to them, catching them both staring. I'm starving. How about Serafina? I think something carb-laden with extra cheese sounds just right.
Good idea. Let me call and see if they can get us in. I need to go by my place and get some clothes. I know where Serafina is. Call me and tell me when the reservation is, and I'll meet you two there. If you don't mind, I'll take you up on the parking spot here.
Not a problem. Why don't I come with you? He realized how much he wanted to have some alone time with her when her suggestion pleased him so much. Part of it, too, was that she wanted to be with him as well.
They can't get us in for another hour and a half.
Galen hung the phone up.
I need to stop by my office. I realized I left my memory stick there, and I want to work a little tomorrow afternoon. I'll meet you at Serafina.
All right. Let me get changed and we'll head to your place, Jack. Do you mind?
Not if I can watch.
She laughed. I'm pretty sure it's not very exciting, but whatever floats your boat.
Be careful, babe. Listen to Jack when you're out.
He stepped into his boots, zipping them. Damn, you look handsome. Renee kissed Galen. Yes, I'll be careful. You too. See you soon. Chapter 9. Sometime later, Jack and Renee headed to his condo. For the first time in his life, he was out and about with his woman. Not a woman he was enjoying or was dating, not with a woman who belonged to another man. Or at least not solely. Pride warmed him as he led her into his place. It wasn't big, but it was his. A place he'd bought with his own money. Partly because he had to get out of the same building as Grace and Cade, but also because he'd never had a place of his own. "I hope you'll bring the art." She walked through the space, taking everything in. It made him a bit anxious, knowing she'd see him so intimately as she traced the lines of a wood carving or read the spine of the book on his nightstand. He grabbed a duffel and began to stuff some clothes into it.
"I like this. You and me alone? One-on-one?"
She nodded, picking up the picture frame on the nearby bedside table. "I like it too. I think we all need that. I want to know you. I admit I'm hungry for details of your life." Nerveless fingers dropped the duffel. He moved to her, loving the way she tipped her chin to look at him.
"There's this need inside me. It's got your name all over it."
He cupped her throat. The feel of the thrum of her pulse beat against his fingers, settled within his head. A song just for her. Her smile always made him want to give her one in return. "You just satisfied your need with Galen less than an hour ago." She sighed softly as he began to knead her shoulders. She had no idea. How could she not know what she did to him and to Galen?
"I did. It was sexy and he's my mate. Touching is part of what shifters need. But you? What this is between you and me is something so deep it's in my bones. You rush through my veins. You make my heart beat. I never understood it. People told me. I watched my friends find mates and they all told me. I even felt a sliver of it when I became Grace's anchor. But to feel it, to have you inside me this way, it humbles me, it scares me, it calms and feeds me. You are something precious to me, in a way no one and nothing else can be."
She looked up into his eyes. "I waited a long time for someone to see me the way Galen does. I never expected him. I never thought I'd be loved the way he does. I really can't do it justice, but meeting him, having a man like him love me, is one of life's biggest blessings. And then you came around a corner and the world went upside down." She rested her head against his chest. "I don't know how it's possible that I'm here with you, when just 5 years ago I had no one. But whatever the reason, I'm glad. Now that you're here, I can't imagine life without you in it. I don't need for you to love me more than Galen. It's not a contest. I need for you to love me as much as you can." He tipped her back so she fell on the mattress.
"You have no idea. How can you not understand? You see so much, but not yourself?"
He shook his head, unbuttoning her sweater only slow enough to keep from ripping it. The tiny bra with the bow perched jauntily between her breasts made him smile. Her hand, the one that had been eagerly working to free his cock from his pants, suddenly stopped and moved to his chest where she shoved. Hard. "Wait. You're anchored to Grace?"
"Oh, yeah. Yes. She's married to and mated with Cade Warden, one of my closest friends. They have 3 kids together, and if my suspicions are correct, another on the way. You'll meet her day after tomorrow when we go to dinner."
"Are you actually going to try to act casual right now? You should have told me." Her annoyance hit him, acrid and sticky.
"What else should I act like? Why are you mad? I anchored her before I knew you existed. You have another husband."
She closed her eyes for a moment. "Get off me."
"Not until we settle this. Sweetheart, I'm here with you. I just told you how much you mean to me. This is silly. I've only known you a few days. This is the first we've ever been alone. When should I have told you?"
"Get off, or I will knee your balls into your fucking throat." Anger coiled her muscles. His wolf stirred, agitated that she was upset, but undeniably attracted to a fully enraged, powerful female. He rolled off to the side.
"I can't believe this is happening. I tell you how much I love you, how much you mean to me, and this is how you react?"
"You truly believe this reaction is to the very sweet things you said to me earlier? Really? I'm done now." She stood and straightened her sweater, buttoning up. It wasn't until she moved to leave the room that he realized done meant really done. He jumped up, halting her progress to the front door.
"You can't just walk away every time we get into a fight. You do this a lot, I notice."
Her eyes narrowed, her hurt pricked him. Why didn't he learn from watching Grace and Cade fight? All his smart ways when it came to his job fell to the side when it came to handling this tiny woman. You notice? Really? Seriously, Jack, get the hell out of my way. I need to be not here with you right now. In your little shrine to Grace Warden. Christ! How did I not really notice? She waved an arm around, indicating the pictures in the room. Two fell from shelves as the heat of her magic, the weight of her power throbbed in the room.
Take it easy, Renee. You're going to blow the place up over something totally stupid. For fuck's sake. I'm with you. She's married with 3 kids. She's someone to me, yes. Special? Yes. But there's nothing more to it than that. You've got some nerve to judge me when you have another man in your bed.
She physically recoiled, her eyes widening. Right, yeah, I noticed you using that twice now. You came into my life, Jack. I told you the first moment you showed interest in me. I told you I was with someone. I told you I loved someone else. I never lied about my situation. I would never use this anchor bond thing to hurt you or her. But what? I can't ask a question? I can't feel anything about it when you hid it from me? I've got news for you, Jack. I don't regret loving Galen. You can never make it into a dirty thing. I won't allow it. You came to me, over and over, I might add. You came to me and Galen knowing what we were. You don't get to use that to hurt me or accuse me because I did nothing wrong. Had you bothered to share with me, I could have told you I have no problem with you loving other people before me. For goodness sake, why would I? That doesn't excuse the way you handled yourself just now. All defensive. It's unnecessary. I'm leaving now. I'll see you at dinner. He didn't budge from his place, blocking the door.
You're right. I overreacted to your question. But it's not an excuse to go herring off on your own when someone may be out there trying to hurt you.
He swallowed back panic at her leaving, annoyance with himself that he reacted the way he did to what he could see was a pretty mellow reaction on her part, until he turned it into a fight. Still, the leaving thing didn't sit well.
I don't like it that you leave instead of stay to fight. Is what we have so fragile you can't test it with a disagreement?
The blast of her anguish was enough to have him reaching for her. But she stepped away, her face flushed, eyes fever bright. I need to not be here with you right now, period. If you don't like that, I can't help it.
This is ridiculous. Let's talk this through.
Her phone started ringing and she ignored it. She stood there so very still, her eyes focused on the floor. Her hands shook. Something wasn't right and he couldn't figure it out. He didn't know her well enough to understand if this was her way of dealing with upset or not. But it didn't fit. He softened his tone, shifted his stance to seem less physically threatening.
Renee, please, tell me. I'm sorry I reacted the way I did. We can't work it out if you're not here and you're not safe out there without me.
When she looked up, her mouth had hardened into a flat line. No emotion at all showed on her face, and that hit him like a slap. Fine. I'll sit here while you pack. Then you can drop me off at home before you go to dinner. This was worse than her anger, worse than her hurt. This was not his mate. She'd shut off. Her emotions walled away even from the bond. He wasn't sure how she was doing it, but it was totally unacceptable.
That's not going to happen. You're going to tell me what the hell is wrong and we're going to fix it.
Her phone rang again. For fuck's sake, she mumbled, pulling the phone out. What? Galen demanded to know what was happening on the other end. Jack didn't even need shifter hearing for that. I've lost my appetite. I want to go to bed early. No, not like that. That's not going to be happening. No. I said no. I'm not interested in a romantic dinner tonight. What? Why? Galen demanded to speak to Jack, and he put his hand out, expecting her to put the phone into it. Instead, she snorted and turned her back on him. I'm going home. I'm not having this conversation with you. I don't need to explain myself. She punched the screen to disconnect, and then turned the ringer off. He began to growl at her, but his own phone interrupted and he picked it up, grateful for Galen's backup in this. whatever it was going on between them.
"What the hell did you do?"
Galen demanded without preamble.
"It's a long story. I'd be trying to fix it, but she won't talk to me about it. She's shut down now. Walled me out." "What the fuck did you say, Jack? I'm going to kick your ass for this. I shouldn't have trusted you with her. She's not just any woman you're fucking, you know. She's got wounds and buttons like anyone else."
"Why would you assume I would ever think of her like that?" She took the phone from him. "Stop it! Oh my God, stop it! I'm not a bone to be argued over, nor am I to be talked about like I don't exist. I won't have you fighting like this." Jack saw the cracks in the wall she'd built around her emotions, felt the strain she put into holding herself together.
"I can't stand to see you like this."
He took the phone back.
"She's right. It's stupid to fight over her this way."
He didn't hear the door close. Renee hit the sidewalk running, grateful she'd worn flats instead of the pretty high-heeled boots she'd nearly chosen instead. She was stupid to think she could ever make it work. She was a freak, wrong, weird. Men like Galen and Jack didn't need that. They had each other now. It assaulted her head, how wrong she was, how unnatural. Her house was quiet when she burst inside. Even the way the banister gleamed from the lemon oil she'd used a few days before didn't please her. Despite his clear belief that she was some kind of mental deficient, Renee locked the doors behind her. She wasn't unaware that there was someone out there focused on her in ways she couldn't understand. She grabbed a bottle of scotch and headed for her workspace, locking the door behind her. She poured a shot while choosing some music. Jack's voice changed every time he said Grace's name. It wasn't that he'd anchored her. It wasn't that he had loved people before her. The way he pretended to be so casual about something that clearly was anything but casual galled her most. He hadn't told her before because Grace was something to him she couldn't be. Maybe he found Renee wanting. Maybe he regretted being mated to her. He'd been so lovely one moment and then things had gone to shit. The little girl within shivered and a ragged sob escaped Renee's mouth, despite the fist clenched to hold it all in. Driven by the need to tuck away somewhere small, Renee gave in and took her blanket into the closet, settling in, letting the dark quiet calm her, soothe the memories enough to keep them at bay. The door downstairs opened. She heard two male voices, knew it was Galen and Jack.
"Renee!"
Galen's bellow was sure to alert the entire street he was pissed. "Great."
"Damn it, Renee, where are you?"
Steps coming closer. The wall fell apart and what was within consumed her, pulled her into the maelstrom of what had been once.
"I'm coming in there now. You're worrying us, Renee."
Galen blinked back the tears as a wave of terror and then pain swept through him. The hand on the knob of the door to her office space tightened, the metal groaning.
"Get in there. Something is wrong. Damn it."
Jack kicked the door in, leaving the knob in Galen's hand. Nothing. He looked around, dropping the doorknob on a nearby desk.
"She's not in the dark room."
Jack stormed back in. Galen saw the closet door, knew she was in there. He indicated it with the tip of his chin, and both of them moved to it.
"I'm opening the door. It's just me and Jack."
She was there, huddled in the far back, a blanket around her body. Ribbons of pain sliced at him the closer he got.
"Baby, what is it?"
He spoke softly, but the tears thickened the sound.
"Would you like to come out? Let us help you, and then we'll leave you alone if that's what you really want. You can't be in this closet in the dark. That's not who you are."
"How do you know who I am?" Her voice edged, honed and sharp with whatever drove her to this place.
"Is this why you run when we fight? Is this why you need to get away?"
Galen coaxed the blanket back from her face. Her eyes weren't focused as she looked at something long past. It was like a scene from one of those horror movies she loved so much. A shiver of fear slid through his gut.
"I know you enough to know you're one of the strongest people alive. I know you enough to love you."
Jack held a hand to her, but her eyes still focused on that far-away thing. Galen shoved the shoes out of his way and sat.
"Okay, then we'll join you. No one needs to be alone in the dark when they're so beloved. By the way, There are seriously 40 pairs of shoes in here. Is this your secret shoe stash?
Jack shook his head when she didn't laugh or even roll her eyes.
What led you here to this closet? Who did this to you?
Jack linked hands with her and she didn't pull away. She shook still, her skin clammy. His wolf wasn't pleased by the stink of her fear on the air, of the claustrophobic oppression of the small cramped space. Galen took her other hand and she whimpered. The sound ripped through him, the pain of it, the fear made him nauseous. And then Jack stood somewhere else. The woman he recognized from the willow broom stood over a younger version of Renee. Those sweet curls were ruthlessly pulled back into a braid. Her face was buried in her hands. I thought I told you to stop this. How are we supposed to have a normal life when you go acting weird again?
I'm sorry, Susan. I didn't mean to. It just happens sometimes.
You've driven away everything kind enough to love you despite your freaky behavior. Your mother left you. Where's your father? He's not here. Left you with me. I'm all you've got. Don't you forget it. The devil is in you. Your mother poisoned you with what she was. You don't have to be that way. Renee gasped for air. No, get out of my head. Galen blinked, not trying to stop the tears. She tried to pull her hands free from theirs. Both men held fast.
No, Renee, she's wrong.
Jack's voice was choked with emotion.
You don't have to run from us. We're not going to leave you.
She groaned again and a wave hit, sucking them back into her memories. A closet, roughly this size. She sat in the very back, her hands over her mouth. Her leg hurt, throbbed from a bruise on her thigh. Fiery welts peppered her calves. Blood ran from her palm where her nails had dug through the skin. Somewhere outside, the sound of furniture being overturned, yelling. How dare you embarrass me in front of my friends? Get out here and take your punishment. The door slamming open, a hand in her hair, pulling her out into the light. She blinked up in time to see the fist headed toward her face, and she opened up the rage she buried all the time. It boiled from her, and Susan fell back, shock etched into her features. No, don't touch me, Susan snarled, her mouth twisted with dark emotion. You broke a glass. They saw you. You weren't near it. You told them my mother abandoned me. She didn't. She wouldn't do that. She had to die to escape you. Your father works all the time, anything to get away from you. She raised her hand and Renee stood on shaky legs. Never. You will never touch me again or I will break you too. She poked a tooth, now loose from how hard she'd been hit earlier once they'd gotten into the car and had driven away. Susan knew she meant it. You'll kill everything you touch, Renee. Don't forget that. This is my house. Your father is with me. Don't push me or you'll end up in a home. All alone. Something roared, and Galen realized it was her. It was Renee shoving them both back, jumping over them to get out of the closet. Her eyes were no longer unfocused, though his were still blurry through tears. Her chest heaved. She held her hands out to ward them off. Leave me alone. Please, please. I didn't mean to. That was my head. Those